Guys.
Okay.
Okay, well, bismillah.
Aaron, I'm making you host in a minute. So, yeah, I think we should be live now. People who are watching us live on YouTube, can you hear us properly? Can you see us? If you could please comment on the live chat, that would be great.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Let me quickly check using my phone. Cool.
Yeah, everyone's good.
Hello. Yeah, yes, we can hear and see you. Okay, sounds good.
Perfect.
Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. Let all three speak so that we make sure.
So I'm here. Good to go. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Are we ready to go?
No, please give a couple of minutes.
Oh, okay. Give it a couple of minutes. Okay. All right.
Just give me the nod when you're ready, please.
Yeah. Okay, where are we?
Okay, we find everything okay. Hi, and so on. So that's all good. Yeah, let's just give a couple of more minutes for people to tune in, because you know, with the alerts going out and then people join.
Yeah, sure, no problem, no problem. That's fine. Aaron, you got yourself on mute there.
Yeah, just waiting for the nod for the go.
No, bro, I was gonna say, moderators on mute. What's going on?
Yeah, already falling over.
All right. Yeah, maybe we'll just give 2 more minutes and then get started. Five past
Yeah,
5.
5 past 5.
Okay, 5 past.
Sounds good. Yeah.
This is the everyone stays silent time.
Don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to talk.
Yeah. Get a bit of rest now.
Yeah. One minute.
Yep. And Aaron, can you see YouTube properly and stuff? Live chat.
Let me just double check.
I mean, not.
I've got a
really
timer
now.
going. Yeah, I've got a timer going as well. So on my phone.
That's
here,
fine. So at least when you get to the Q, as long as you test once, that's fine.
Mm.
For the Q&A from audience.
Yeah, I've got it here. It's fine.
Cool.
Okay, I think we're about ready. Okay, 5 past it is.
Yep. Let's get started.
Okay, all right. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Tuning in from wherever you are through the live stream on Operation Stephen. Today's debate is going to be covering the question of whether the God of Abraham from the Bible is in fact the same as the God of Muhammad from the Quran. My name is Aaron. I'm a member of the Operation Stephen team here as well, but I will be acting as a neutral moderator, and I'll be there to enforce the rules, which I'm just going to briefly explain now. The rules will be there to keep the debate as structured and as gentlemanly as possible. So not quite as lively as Speaker's Corner, but it's there really just to make sure that everyone is able to absorb the most amount of information possible, which is sometimes always isn't possible in such lively formats. Okay, so these are the rules that both parties will have agreed to, or have agreed to rather, prior to entering into the debate. So in this, I'll basically try and give everyone the fairest opportunity to present their respective arguments in the rule set that I'm about to lay out. So either moderator will remain neutral on both sides and to enforce the rules. Either moderator will introduce the first section briefly to open up the debates. And upon completion of each section, I will then briefly introduce the following section and then repeat the same format. I will ask each side to remain on mute until it's their time to talk. And in that case, it would be the Christian side is on mute while the Muslim side is speaking, and so forth from there. To ensure that the rules are adhered to, if there are any interrupts, I will then interject and place that person on mute, but there will be a 3-strike rule in place. Repeated violations, thus getting to the top of the 3-strike rule, will then mean that the person who has violated the rules then loses the debate, they forfeit the debate. This also prevents anyone from potentially sabotaging the debate if they were to get into a difficult spot, or there's something that they can't quite answer. So all the rules are in the interest of fairness and to keep everything as open and as clear as possible. I will not be answering any questions or interjecting in any other way myself. At the very end of the debates, just before the closing arguments, I will say to the audience that you'll have 10 minutes on completion of the closing arguments to post questions via the Operation Stephen live chat, which is on live on YouTube right now. So, but I'll go through the format now, and then you'll see what I mean. So. The formats will be with the Arul will go first, can ask the questions first, and then the opposing side will answer afterwards. The first question will be each side will present their main argument, with a total of 20 minutes each. On completion of that, each side will then give their first rebuttals of one another's main arguments, and then we'll get 10 minutes to do so. Following on from this, there will be a second round of rebuttals between our two sides here today, and in the second round there will be given 5 minutes to provide a response to the first rebuttal opened up by the other side. Then we will move into a cross-examination section, which gives each side a chance to ask 4 consecutive questions, but one at a time, to allow for a direct reply. The time allowed to ask the question will be 1 minute, and then 2 minutes will be allowed for the response, and then an additional minutes will be given back to the questioner afterwards to give a comment on the answer that has been supplied to them. Okay, on completion of this section, I will then give you, the audience that are live on YouTube, a warning to say in the over the next 10 minutes, please think of a question, because on completion of this next section, it will then be open to Q&A. So the section that we're coming up will be 5 minutes for each side to give closing speeches, and they'll probably provide a conclusion on one another's perspective also as they bring the debate to a close. And on completion of that, we will then move into the questions and answers section. I, as the moderator, will try to make sure that there is I will presume it's going to be majority Christian and majority Muslims in the comments section. So I will try to answer one question from one side, one from the next. But when you post your question, just put to Arul or to Mohammed, and that way I can cipher through them a little bit quicker. Okay, so without further ado, I will introduce our two sides here. Our guest here today is named Mohammed Abd Al-Razack, and he's representing the Islamic side. He's a Muslim who frequently visits Speaker's Corner there and opens up debates and healthy discussions with people down there, and is actively engaged in dawah. So Mohammed, if you would like to say a few words just to open with, please.
Yeah. بسم الله إن الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وكما الله قال في كتابه الكريم قال إنني هداني ربي إلى صراط مستقيم دينا قيما ملة إبراهيم حنيفا وما كان من المشركين. In translation, what I've said is, in the name of Allah, the most beneficent and most merciful, all praises and thanks be to Allah. I praise Him and seek His aid. We seek refuge with Allah from the evils of ourselves and the evils of our deeds. Whomsoever Allah guides, none can lead astray, and whomsoever Allah leads astray, none can guide. And I testify that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His final messenger. I recited a prayer from the Quran from Moses, where it says, "O Lord, open for me my chest and ease my task for me, and loosen the knot from my tongue, so that they may understand my speech." And I recited a verse from the Quran which says, "Say indeed, my Lord has guided me to a straight path, the right religion, the religion of Ibrahim, who was a true monotheist, and he was not from the polytheists." So I would like to thank Arul for this opportunity to debate. Aaron, thank you for moderating this debate, and thank the audience for tuning in to this important question that we rest our salvation on, because at the end of the day, if we don't worship the correct God and we don't recognize who He is, then regardless of what we end up believing, it will not help us. So with that, that's all I have to say, really. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. And from the Christian camp, we have brother Arul Velusamy who leads Operation Stephen. Also to be found on Speaker's Corner. You've probably seen him on many other people's YouTube channels, SoCo content over everything, two popular ones that come to mind. And Brother Arul has been doing Christian apologetics and polemics for a number of years now as well. So seeking to engage in actively discipling more people so that disciples can then go and make disciples. Brother Arul, is there any other comments you'd like to make now?
Yeah, I'd like to pray and start also. Loving Heavenly Father, we come before your throne of grace. It's a marvelous privilege that you have chosen me and the Christians across the world as your children. But we also know that across the world, there are billions of people who still need to know you, of your love, of your care, of your compassion. So Lord, even today, even as you have equip me in terms of being able to share things related to you, I ask that you may guide me and help me, Lord, and also help Mohammed in presenting his argument as clearly as he could. Help us, Lord, but at the end of the day, ultimate goal is to get to know you personally and to love you as dearly as you have loved us. Because ultimately you want us all to be your children, to be with you in heaven, Lord. So commit all things in your hands. Help us. Bless you. In Jesus' precious name, I ask all these things, my Father in heaven, as per the leading of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you also for this privilege. I thank Aaron for moderating today. And Mohammed, it's a pleasure. It has been a pleasure catching up with you in the couple of times we caught up at Speaker's Corner. And it's again a pleasure. I found you to be gentle in our conversations, and I hope we could have such a conversation even today here. And I thank you for sharing the platform with me and Aaron. Thank you.
Okay, so without further ado, then we will move on to the first question, first opening part of the debate, where each side will present their main argument for a total of 20 minutes each. And Arul to open, so just let me know when you want to go.
I have one little problem. Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, Aaron, you are the host. Can you please enable me share screen? I forgot to do that while I was host. So if you go to the shield-like icon at the bottom, you should be able to say hello.
Yeah, there you go. Done.
Cool. So if I could.
Okay,
all right.
now.
Okay, 1 second. All right, let's get started. The title for today is the God of Abraham, the God of Muhammad. And of course, my answer is crystal clear. No, absolutely not. Not even by millions of miles. Very important. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to present the details of the God that Abraham got to know, and then compare the aspects of him, the nature, the details related to him, his identity, and so on. Compare those things against the one Muhammad claimed he got to know, the Islamic Allah. I'd like to compare. To start off, I'm going to present a summary of 5 very specific points. Massive differences. Very objective, well-defined, massive differences. At the start, I'll present the summary, and then I'll take you through one point at a time in a bit more detail. That's my plan for today. And then I'd ask when it comes to Muhammad's turn to really explain how you could reconcile these massive differences and claim these are both the same God. That's going to be my challenge as I present it back to Muhammad. Okay. The 5 specific areas, what I call irreconcilable differences between the God that Abraham got to know versus the Islamic Allah of Muhammad. In terms of God of Abraham, his overarching plan for mankind, he has an Israel Messiah-centric redemption plan for people across the world. Israel-centric, Messiah-centric redemption. Whereas when it comes to the Islamic Allah of Muhammad, what you find is, you find a Muhammad-centric, Muhammad of course being an Arab, not an Israelite, Muhammad-centric rampage of the world, gaining physical control over the world. Secondly, moral character. I'm going to give specific details of exemplary moral character of the God of Abraham, specific details. And in comparison, I'm going to do a straight apple-to-apple comparison along the specific details I provide. And I find Islamic Allah really random, and as a matter of having character in those aspects, non-existent. In terms of the way they deal with things, God of Abraham goes with covenants. That's the way he deals with things. Legally binding covenants, contracts. When he signs a covenant, even he doesn't go against it. And to make it really legally binding and to make redemption from sin and so on legally binding, he deals with offerings and sacrifices, requires them. In contrast, if you get to Islamic Allah of the Quran, what you find is he really doesn't even care about keeping his word, doesn't care about covenants, never gave a covenant, even by a Muhammad. No, not trustworthy, no legally valid statements, legally binding statements. In terms of how they interacted with people, or the way I'm going to present God of Abraham as someone who had a very intimate relationship with people. That was his intention. God with us is what he wanted to be. In contrast, Islamic Allah was a distant dictator. No one could really meet him on earth. He was a distant dictator, a distant policeman. In terms of the entire plan for man, a specific human being, God of the Bible, God of Abraham in specific, is a God who cares about relationships. Whereas when it comes to the Islamic Allah, all that he cares about is a doctrinal statement. He hides behind doctrinal statements. That's it. Once you memorize a doctrinal statement and recite it, that's it. You're done. You're a good Muslim. You don't get to know what his character is. You don't get to know how he feels on a day-to-day basis and so on. None of those things happen. So in other words, along 5 specific points, my argument is going to be, these are completely different entities, never to be confused as one and the same. The first one, overarching plan for the mankind across the world. Firstly, the Islamic Allah of Muhammad. Quran Surah 21 ayat 107 says, "We have not sent you, O Muhammad, except as a mercy to all the worlds." So according to Islamic Allah, Muhammad is the mercy for everyone. As an Arab, the end time, through him, there is going to be an empire which spreads. Come to God of Abraham, the God who Abraham got to know. Right in the life of Abraham, God spoke of a promised seed who would come from Abraham, who would come from him. And then he narrows down and says, comes via Isaac. And he says, via that seed, via that promised seed, that God was going to bless all the nations in the world. So it's very Israel-centric, and it is Messiah-centric in the sense that even under the Israel-centric approach, it's still that seed-centric. It is that seed through whom all the world is going to be blessed. Very different. Muhammad has no space here. Arabs have no part to play in this except to receive the blessing of the promised seed. And this particular promised seed via Isaac, that's very important. Because he is seen as the promised son. And the people group who are going to sort of steward the entire plan are geographically narrowed down. It's all within Israel. That is the center of the plan. Promised seed, promised son, promised land, promised nation. And in all these, where does Ishmael even fit in? He was a mere blip in the entire plan. To begin with, God called Abraham father of a nation. When Abraham went his own way to get his own carnal plan, son Ishmael, God then had to change and said, now I'll make you father of many nations. But still, my promised nation, which I originally had in mind, is the original plan. Ishmael is just a blip. We find that through verses which I can quickly quote. In terms of Genesis 12:3, God said, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Genesis 21:10-12. In Isaac your seed shall be called. And then Genesis 22:18. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Very important. Muhammad has no place. And therefore, we're really talking about two entirely different gods here. One is the one who revealed himself to Abraham. Another is the one who Muhammad claimed he spoke to. Not revealed to mankind, but Muhammad claimed. So that's very important. Now, moving on to the next aspect, moral character. I'm going to take 4 specific aspects of moral character, which Abraham experienced, and then compare that against the Islamic Allah that Muhammad claimed to have got a revelation from. Abraham, in Abraham's life, he came across someone called Abimelech, king of Philistines. And in a particular instant, Abimelech took Abraham's wife, not knowing that it was Abraham's wife. And then God comes and speaks to him and he says, if you take another man's wife, you are a dead man. I will kill you because this is another man's wife. God of Abraham doesn't allow anyone to take anyone else's wife. Quran Surah 33, ayah 37. Islamic Allah willy-nilly allows Muhammad to take his own adopted sons, not just any other person's wife, but even worse still, his own adopted son's wife. He can't get any worse. And then if we move on to taking spoils, profit from others' properties, which the properties that they legitimately owned. Abraham captured Abraham fought against some kings who had captured Lot and the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. He brought them back. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah said, Abraham, you can keep all the properties, just give me the people. Abraham said, no, I will never ever profit from you, because if I did, you would say you made me rich. Never ever do that. You can have all, I won't take any. That's God of Abraham's character reflected in Abraham. But if you go to Muhammad, Quran 48:20, profit from spoils illegitimately, things that others own, you can take willy-nilly. Moving on, acquiring properties that belong to others. Abraham had to buy a burial place. And he said, he was a very mighty man at that time. But Abraham said, I would pay for it, the market price to get this land. What does the Islamic Allah inspired? Muhammad and Islamic Allah says, you can grab lands from disbelievers. As long as they are disbelievers, no one cares. Finally, keeping oaths, promises. You find Abraham keeping oaths. Abraham also had to learn about God himself, in that God keeps his word. In contrast, Quran 66 ayah 2, it actually says, for Muhammad, willy-nilly you can be absolved of oaths. So comparing the moral character, Islamic Allah does not even come close to God of Abraham. Remember, I'm only talking about what Abraham got to know. If you were to add to this what Moses got to know and what others got to know, Islamic Allah is not even a place for debates like this to happen. And that's very important. Thirdly, dealings. How do they deal with people? What kind of contracts do they, how do they establish any deal? God of Abraham goes with legally binding covenants. He did that at two occasions, specific occasions with Muhammad. It's all a grand ceremony. Altar, offerings, in one particular situation, and another situation was covenant of circumcision. God of Muhammad doesn't even have a clue about covenants, because he doesn't even care about keeping oaths. He can absolve oaths. He doesn't even stick to his word. Why covenant? Leave him alone. Doesn't even care. Legally binding offerings and sacrifices. Genesis 12:8, Genesis 13:18. You see God, Abraham offering sacrifices to God that he got to know. Islamic Allah, again, no such thing, because he doesn't really care. It's all not legally binding, no legal satisfaction necessary. So none of these things really matter. God of the Bible even asked for a sacrifice of Abraham's own son, Isaac. Very important. Why did he do that? Because in terms of what is legally required, things mankind had terribly messed up. And there was no willy-nilly, I'll let you go sort of leeway. This all need to be satisfied in a proper way. And that's what we find in with the God of the Bible. Moving on, fellowship with people. What we find with Abraham, God came in person, came to Abraham, sat with him, and had dinner with him. So God of Abraham eats, God of Abraham shows up on earth, God of Abraham sits with Abraham, has fellowship with Abraham. Abraham, you might know, was even treated as a friend by God. That's the God of Abraham. Islamic Allah doesn't even care. He never ever shows up nowhere near God of Abraham. So God of Abraham is seen as God with us. Islamic Allah is seen as a very distant dictator. Even in heaven, he's not going to show up in front of you. So he is a dictator, you're merely his slaves. That's what you find with Islamic Allah. Finally, now this is the very interesting part. Now Muhammad already mentioned about the fact of monotheism. To him, monotheism is what captures the essence of everything. Now let me give you a hint. Actually, if monotheism is all that mattered, Genesis would not have an account of Abraham. Genesis chapter 11 is where Abrahamic account begins. And at the beginning of the account, Abraham was already a monotheist. At the beginning, God said, come, and he went. He knew there was one God and he followed. But the point is, you find in entire biblical account of Abraham was merely starting there. It didn't end there. It was merely starting there. What you find with the God of the Bible is that God of the Bible wanted to develop a very elaborate personal relationship with Abraham. Not just that. Ask any Jew who knows the scriptures, or ask any Christian who knows the scriptures. We Christians and Jews, we begin at monotheism, but that's just a minor starting point. But our entire life's goal is that we get to know God as our Father, as our friend, as someone who cares about me, and so on. And that's what happened with Adam in the Garden in Eden. What did Adam do? Did he suddenly become a polytheist? No. He just went against God's plan. And in other words, the point is, with Abraham, what God was planning to do is, of course, he wants monotheism, but that's the starting point. More importantly, he wants people to come back to him, to be with him in fellowship. God of the Bible inspired Abraham to ask for evidence of his presence. Abraham did that. Genesis 15:8. He asked, how will I know? And then God went on to clarify how Abraham could know by showing up in person and by having a covenant established in person. Very important. So how could Abraham get to know about God? By meeting him in person. God at a couple of different places, Genesis 15:7, 17:1, actually personally introduced himself to others, much like how Muhammad did today, I did, Aaron did. God came and said, hey Abraham, I am El Shaddai, I am God Almighty. And elsewhere he did a similar introduction also. The point is, why, if monotheism is all that matters, why does he come and introduce himself? Well, the reason is, God of the Bible, monotheism is just the starting point, necessary but not sufficient. God of the Bible cares about a lifelong relationship established, which you do not find with the Islamic Allah. All that he cares about is, as long as you recite the simple formula that only Allah is Allah and so on, that's it, you're done. That's your life. And everything else, any test or anything which happens beyond that, is just to test you on that one single point. And this is a bit mysterious anyway, the point is, Muslims should really get to know God of the Bible is much more sophisticated. With the God of the Bible, God cares about me developing a very trust-based relationship with him. He would like to trust me. I'd like to trust him. He would like me to trust him. He'd like to walk with me, speak to me, answer me, give me more information, predict things for me, and so on. That's the God of the Bible. And that is why even Islam recognizes, but without having a clue, Islam recognizes Abraham was called Khalilullah, a friend of God. Abraham wasn't a servant, a slave of God or anything. If that were the case, we wouldn't find anything in Genesis about Abraham at all, because he had all that even before Genesis, the end of chapter 11 begins. But what you see in terms of Abrahamic account right through the book of Genesis is Abraham then becomes a friend of God, which you find expressed more in detail as you walk through the subsequent chapters of Genesis. So what have we done now? So let me quickly summarize what I've done now. So I've really presented 5 very specific areas where I see the Islamic Allah being polar opposite, sometimes having no clue about the nature of God of Abraham. God of Abraham was Israel-centric, Messiah-centric, moral character, exemplary, deals with legally binding covenants, legally valid settlements he requires. He is someone who wants to be with me, with you, friendship as friends, to develop true trust-based relationships. In comparison, Islamic Allah has a Muhammad-centric, completely outside of the Bible, against the Bible, in contrast to the Bible, fighting against the God of the Bible, Muhammad-centric rampage of the world to gain physical dominance, moral character, random. He doesn't even care if you marry your adopted son's wife and so on, acquire wealth that really belongs to someone else purely because they are a disbeliever and so on, and doesn't care about keeping oaths and therefore really not trustworthy in any shape or form. And a distant dictator, he doesn't care to come to relate to you. All that he wants is you better obey, recite. That's it. That's all he wants. And he hides behind belief statements. So the challenge to Muhammad is simple. Very clear differences. If you still want to claim Islamic Allah is the same as God of Abraham. You really need to reconcile. You need to give an explanation as to how you could reconcile these very, very massive differences. If you really can't reconcile them, then you really need to agree with me that God of Abraham is not the Islamic Allah. Islamic Allah is a very different entity who showed up much later, not having a clue. Does he even exist? We don't know, because all that we know of him is what Muhammad claimed of him. So for all that we know, he might not even exist. And that's very important for us to know. So challenge to Muhammad is reconcile this. If you can't, you need to agree with me and come on my side. Any Muslim should become a Christian. How much time have we got? Still 1 more minute? Or?
Yes, 1 more minute, exactly.
And so that's the rough challenge. I know Muhammad could try his own few arguments, which I've already prepared. Claims about monotheism, claims about Ishmael being a descendant of Abraham, and so on. He can try all those arguments if he wants to, and I can rebut them properly, God strengthening, in the rebuttal sections. But as long as he doesn't reconcile what I have presented here, he hasn't done his duty. He wants to praise Islamic Allah, well, praise him well, but explain why and how he could be the God of Abraham by reconciling these massive polar opposite natures in many regards. Thank you.
Okay, well, 10 seconds to spare. I'll move over to, Mohammed, just let me know when you're ready to go. Yeah, let me know when you're ready to go.
I will just set my timer. Okay, yeah, good to go. All right. Okay. So for my opening statement, so as Arul said, we believe in monotheism, okay? But Arul has demonstrated that he has no idea what monotheism constitutes in Islam. So we'll give a quick run through. In Sahih Muslim, number 8a, and you can find this on sunnah.com, it says, and this is the hadith of Jibril, he, the inquirer, talking about Jibril, said to Rasul, inform me about Iman, all right, and faith. And the Holy Prophet said, it is that you believe in Allah, His angels, His books, His apostles, in the day of judgment, and affirm your faith in the divine decree about good and evil. And then it goes on to talk about ihsan, which is the excellence of worship, okay? So these are the 6 pillars of Islam. And this what constitutes the question of who is God? Why does God do certain things? What is God? How do we have a relationship with God? How do we obey him? What does he want from us? All of these questions fall under this umbrella of the 6 pillars of Iman. So if I can just, last thing, where is going on? There we go. All right. So Tawheed, monotheism, is broken down into 3 aspects, okay? The oneness of his godship, okay, which is how we are to worship him, how we are to connect with him. Arul says we don't have a connection, and that is to single him out. So we have to single him out as the only one worthy of worship in order to connect with him properly. We don't associate any partners with him, okay? The oneness in his lordship, that he alone is a sustainer and maintainer of all things. And the oneness of his names and attributes. Again, when it comes to relationship, we know 99 of his names and attributes. Okay, I would like Arul to show me all of these names and attributes that we can address Allah by, or God by, okay, that Abraham believed in. Okay, now Ibn Qayyim, rahimahullah, he said that most of the surahs in the Quran contain Tawheed. And we can find an example of this in Surah Al-Fatiha alone. In verse 2, when we say Rabbil Alameen, it displays his lordship. He is the Lord of all the worlds. And his godship, alhamdulillah, all praises to Allah. In verse 3, we see Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. This displays the attributes, and the attributes are introduced in the 113 out of 114 chapters of the Quran. And we also see that his godship, because these names are unique to him, and this is what's called a volitional tawheed. In verse 5, it displays his godship again when we say Iyyaka na'budu, it is you alone we worship, and his lordship, wa iyyaka nasta'in, and you alone we ask for help. Okay, so this is an example of how we find tawheed and thing. And we have a belief in the angels. And we see in chapter 16, verse 2, where Allah says, He sends down the angels with the inspiration of His command upon His servants. And Ibn Kathir commentates on this, and he says Allah mentions He chooses messengers from His angels and from His men. Now, when we go into belief of the scriptures, we're talking about the original scriptures, and this is not just limited to the scriptures, but revelation that is given to the prophets in its totality. And it says in chapter 4, verse 163, indeed, we have revealed to you, O Muhammad, as we revealed to Noah and the prophets after him, and we revealed to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and their descendants, Jesus, and so forth, and we gave David the book of the Psalms. And again, he says, He has sent down upon you, Muhammad, the book in truth, confirming what was before it. And when we talk about what was before it, we're talking about what was revealed, and this is explicitly mentioned in chapter 3, verse 3, when he's talking about what He has revealed, not what we have today. Belief in the prophets. And he says, and Allah says in chapter 4, verse 164, and we sent messengers about whom we have related their stories to you and before, and messengers whom we have not related to you. And we are obliged to believe in all of these messengers. Okay. Belief in the day of judgment. Allah says in the Quran, they believe in Allah on the last day and enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong and hasten to good deeds, because that's what Allah commanded. Now, the divine decree, it is split into two. What is already ordained for you and what will never change, and what is a consequence of your choices in terms of the foreknowledge of Allah. And we say this, and we see this in chapter 2, or perhaps you hate a thing that is good for you, and perhaps you love a thing and that is bad for you. And Allah knows while you do not know. And we see that Allah does not charge a soul except within its capacity. This is in chapter 2, verse 286. And we also see in chapter 9, verse 81, never will we be struck except by what Allah has decreed for us, and He is our protector. So that's the 6 pillars of faith summarized. Now, how do we attribute this to Ibrahim alayhi salam from the Quran? So Ibrahim alayhi salam in chapter 26, verse 13, we read, we have revealed what we enjoined upon Ibrahim. Okay, so, and that is monotheism. Okay, that's what it means. And Ibrahim alayhi salam himself says, verily, I turn my face towards Him who has created the heavens and the earth and away from idolatry. So we see that he's singling out God. This is the first thing he does. And this is in chapter 6, verse 79. Now, this believes he believed in his godship because he doesn't associate others with God, and his lordship and his names and attributes, as he understood that God is the creator and He alone created the heavens and the earth. And he also conveys this to his people in chapter 29, verses 16 to 17. Now, we also see in chapter 21, verse 68 to 69, where the idolaters said, burn him and support your gods if you are to act. And Allah said, O fire, be coolness and safety upon Ibrahim. Now, in the tafsir, in the book of tafsir in Sahih Bukhari, hadith number 5464, we read, the last statement when he was thrown into the fire was, Allah is sufficient for us and He is the best disposer of affairs. And this shows that Ibrahim alayhi salam believed firmly in the divine decree, as we saw earlier. And this is also shown in the sacrifice narrative in the Quran in Surah As-Saffat, verses 102 and 103. Yeah, so, okay. Let me just go through this. And we read in Surah Al-Hijr, verses 51 to 64, where it talks about the angels coming to Ibrahim to inform him about Isaac and what is to happen with Sodom and Gomorrah. And this shows that he believes in the angels, as well as other prophets, because Lot in the Quran is a prophet. Okay. And we know that Lot is a prophet in the Quran, because in Surah Al-Shu'ara, verses 166 to 162, Lot says to them, will you not fear Allah? Indeed, I am to you a trustworthy messenger. But how did Ibrahim know, alayhi salam, that he was a messenger? Well, it's because, as we read before, he sends down the angels with inspiration in chapter 16, verse 2, and indeed the angels were sent to Lot. And that's where we see the 6 pillars of faith applied to Ibrahim in the Quran. Okay, perfect. So the question is, can we find these 6 pillars of faith in the Old Testament? Can we see what Muhammad believed being applied to Ibrahim in the Old Testament? Yeah, well, of course. In Genesis 22:5, he said to the servant, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. So he believed that God is the only one worthy of worship. Now, who is God? As we read in Exodus 3:6, God said to Moses, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham. So the God of Abraham is the same one that was revealed to Moses. And we read in Genesis 1:26 that he is not a trinity. When he says, let us create man in our image, we read from the Midrash in Bamidbar Rabbah in 19 verse 3, that he's talking about Adam, and he consulted with the ministering angels. And this is the same, you read this in the Sanhedrin as well, and so on and so forth, okay? So this is who God was to Abraham. He was the Unitarian God. He wasn't a Trinity, okay? And it was quite interesting that Arul did not mention who he believed God is in relation to what Abraham believed God is. So this is my challenge to you, Arul. I want you to demonstrate that the Trinity is the God that Abraham believed in, because if he didn't believe in that, then he's either worshiping a false God or you are incorrect about who you worship. Did he believe in his names and attributes? Yes, because he knew him as El Elyon in Genesis 14:22, the Most High. He knew him as the possessor. He knew him as El Shaddai, Almighty God. So he knew the names and attributes of God, not the 99 that we have today, because that came over progressive revelation. However, he knew that God had more than one name. Now, before we go into this question was brought up about who is Allah? Does he even exist? Well, ask the Arab Jews and the Arab Christians, because when you cross-reference Genesis 17:1 with the Hebrew and the English, we see An Allah al-Qadir. So the name Allah, and this is referring to El Shaddai. So El Shaddai is referenced in the Arabic translations of the Hebrew Bible as Allah al-Qadir. So the name Allah, so this question of does Allah exist? Of course he exists. It's in the text. Belief in angels. Does he believe in angels? Of course. Now, Arul brought up on his presentation that this is God coming in person. Well, no. If we actually look at the Targums about Genesis 18, we see 3 angels were sent to our father Abraham. And this is in Jerusalem and in Jonathan. We read in Rashi, same thing. And behold, 3 men, one to announce Sarah, the birth of a son, one to overthrow Sodom, and one to cure Ibrahim. We read in Genesis Rabbah 50 verse 2 and Bava Mesvia 86b, we read that it was the angels. And in fact, in Bava Mesvia, we read, okay, here we go, yeah. Every action performed himself for the ministering angel, the Holy One, blessed be he performs the actions for Abraham's descendants. And every action that Abraham performed through a messenger, the Holy One, blessed be he, likewise performed for his descendants through a messenger. So God did not appear in person. He communicated to Ibrahim alayhi salam through a messenger, and specifically angels in this instance. You need to read the Jewish commentary on this. This is not a Christian text. This is Jewish text that's been going on for 4,000 years through oral tradition. And we also read in 1 Kings 8:27, but will God really dwell on earth? The heavens and the earth cannot contain him. So this idea that God coming to earth personally is not backed up in by Abraham. It's not backed up by the exegesis, and it's not backed up by the rest of the Old Testament. Now, did he believe in revelation? Well, of course, because he had revelation himself. He had the circumcision and the everlasting covenant, which is, again, another question to Arul. If you believe that you worship the God of Abraham, why do you not follow why do Christians in general do not follow the everlasting covenant of Abraham, which is circumcision. I understand the circumcision on the heart, but this is specifically to circumcision of the flesh. Of course, the call in Genesis 12, that was revelation to him, the revelation through the angels of the birth of Isaac and the destruction, and Genesis 22, obviously about the sacrifice. Now, I'm not going to go into the narrative of the sacrifice just yet. I'll address that in the rebuttal. Belief in the prophets. Abraham believed in of the prophethood of Isaac, as we read in Genesis 26:25, that when the Lord appeared to Isaac and gave him prophecy. So prophets, as we know, gain prophecy. And verse 1 says, in the days of Abraham. So this shows that Abraham was still alive, despite talking about his death in the previous chapter. So in the days of Abraham, Isaac was given this prophecy. He was made a prophet. Belief in the last day. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't really see in the Old Testament about heaven and earth, paradise and hellfire. However, we read in Genesis 15:15, you, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. Now, how can Abraham go to his ancestors when they're already dead? Because there is an afterlife. And despite and we read in the Midrash again in Moed Katan 3:19, and this is in the Ayin Yaakov, the Glick edition, that when someone is to die, you say go in peace and not go with peace. And this is why in the Hebrew the preposition is be, not le, which is with. And the verse says le shalom, okay? Sorry, le shalom is in Genesis 4:18, which shows a discrepancy in the translation. And Eruvin 19a, it says, it talks about Gehenna, and it talks about Ibrahim, who comes and raises them and receives them. This is talking about the afterlife. Okay, so I'll quickly read it, so I have time. There it speaks of those who are liable at that time for punishment in Gehenna, which is similar to the Arabic Jahannam. But our father Abraham comes and raises them up and receives them. He does not leave the circumcised behind and allow them to enter Jahannam, except for a Jew who had relations with a Gentile woman. So this idea of Abraham believing in the last day exists. Belief in the divine decree and ihsan, the excellence of worship. Did he believe in the divine decree? Of course, because we read in Genesis 22:1 that God tested Abraham. So this shows that Abraham had a choice whether he could pass this test or fail this test. And when we read that the sacrifice did not happen, it shows that God didn't decree at all that Isaac in the Old Testament narrative is going to be sacrificed. And in fact, this highlights something, that human sacrifice was not something that God liked in the Old Testament, hence stopping this happening from Isaac despite commanding it. And it says explicitly it's a test. And again, throughout the Old Testament, we see that God abhors human sacrifice. So again, this is a challenge to Arul. I want you to demonstrate that God wants and likes and approves human sacrifice, because these questions challenge your two main doctrines, the doctrine of the Trinity and the doctrine of the crucifixion. And this is stemming to the God of Abraham. If the God of Abraham was a Trinity and he did appeal of human sacrifice, why do we see that this is not the case when we read the narrative of Ibrahim's life and his relationship with God? And we see, we see the excellence in his worship, because obviously, despite that being his son, he went through with it without a problem, despite the heartache. So that is pretty much it. So when we talk about the relationship with God, it actually falls under these 6 pillars of Iman: who God is, why God does certain things, how he connects with us, what he seeks of us, how we worship him, how he reacts, how he has a relationship with us. In fact, in one of the Hadith al-Qudsi, he says specifically, "O son of Adam, I love you. So by my right over you, love me." This is very explicitly. He actually tells us in the Quran, we read that he is closer to us than our jugular vein. In the Quran, we read that when he says to our Rasul, when they ask you about me, and then he cuts him off from that conversation, and he addresses us directly and says, I am near. So this relationship between us and Allah is very explicit in the Quran. I don't believe that you've read the Quran. I believe you've taken some things out of context from the Quran, which again I will address in my rebuttal. I've got another minute and a half. Is that correct, Aaron? Got about another minute and a half?
Yes, you did.
Excellent.
Correct.
Excellent. Okay. So let me carry on. So as I mentioned about the human sacrifice, I've gone through Abraham's life. Okay, he didn't allow Isaac to be sacrificed, and we read this in Deuteronomy 18:10, Leviticus 18:21, 2 Kings 21:6, and Deuteronomy 12:31. That God just does not want human sacrifice at all. So you have to explain this because it is one of your core doctrines. I've got about a minute. As for the narrative of Ismail alayhi salam, let me, you know what? Because I have to scroll up to find it. Let me see if I can find it quickly in my notes here.
40 seconds.
40 seconds. Okay. You know what? I will address this in the next section. 20 seconds is not long enough. Yeah, all right.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. Okay, good stuff. Okay, now moving on to the next section, whereby each side will offer up their first round of rebuttals to counter each other's main arguments. Each question, each position will be given 10 minutes with which to do so. So I'll open up with Brother Arul, first of all. And just let me know when you want to start.
Okay, 1 second, please. Okay, I can start now.
Okay, good.
Nice try, Mohammed. You want me to explain Trinity? You want me to explain Christian doctrine, sacrifice, and so on? Let me please remind you the topic for the day. I'd like to explain about Jesus. I'd like to explain and give my life for Jesus. I have all the time in the world for that. But the topic for today is simple. Is the God of Abraham, the God who Abraham got to know, the Islamic Allah? That's the topic. Not explaining Trinity, not explaining Christian doctrine, sacrifice, and so on. I presented a very precise list of 5 specific attributes. I'd like to show that again here, please. Very specific. Israel Messiah-centric approach in redemption of the entire world. No place for Arabs except to receive the blessing, not to give the blessing. So Muhammad claiming that, out of place, disobedient to the God of Abraham, totally against the God of Abraham, rebellion. Moral character, I gave you a list of specific ones. Can you take someone else's wife? Well, God of Abraham thinks, no, never, no one's wife. But Islamic Allah thinks, even your adopted son's wife you can take. And then taking booty, taking other people's possessions, not even paying, be courteous, and so on. All sorts of moral, obnoxious behavior is what you find with the Islamic Allah. Whereas with the God of Abraham, exemplary behavior along each one of these lines. I'm hoping you will begin addressing in your rebuttal section these details, because these are details I really care about. If they are very different, how can they be the same God? God of the Bible deals with covenants. Cheekily, Muhammad asked me, why would I not be circumcised? Well, to remind Muhammad, God is legally binding in terms of his covenants. The covenant of circumcision was only given to the ethnic descendants of Abraham alone, and servants who were brought under their household. I am not one of them. So I'm not sure where he gets his ideas of covenant from. But he needs to address, Muhammad needs to address covenants, legally binding, trustworthy, keeps his word, whereas Islamic Allah doesn't care. Absolution from oaths and so on, doesn't care, willy-nilly, does all sorts of different things. He is a law unto himself. And then how do you know if he's going to let you into heaven? Maybe heaven doesn't exist if he was going to change his word every now and then. Fellowship with people, relationship. I really liked. I got a very interesting explanation of what relationship with God is. Muhammad clearly clarified that according to him, relationship with God is what is demonstrated in the 6 pillars. In other words, well, if a man were to marry his wife, how does a man relate to his wife? Oh, look at this document, recite this multiple times, you develop good relationship. But to your wife, you can never go to. Near your wife, you can never go to. What kind of relationship is that? Looking at a document, reciting, oh, my wife is beautiful. Oh, my wife is 5 feet tall. Oh, my wife is this and wife is... That is not developing a relationship. How do we develop relationship on the face of the earth today? You get to know the person. You spend time with them. You speak to each other. You get to know their character. You get to know what they like, what they don't like. You try to please them. And it works both ways. Relationship is never one way. It's always both ways. And God of Abraham did that. He came and met people in person. Muhammad did raise a particular point about whether God came. It's interesting in terms of explaining that he read everything apart from the Bible itself. Everything apart from the Bible. That is telling. That is telling as to how he learns about the God of Abraham. Okay, fellowship with people, God with us. Entire deal, relationships, not belief statements. Now, let me come to address some specific points here, please. What did Muhammad do in his introductory remark is very important. That's very telling for everyone who is listening, especially the Muslims. What he is giving is a lecture on what monotheism is. What he is giving is a lecture on what the 6 pillars of Islam are, according to him, the 6 pillars. This is what he spoke of. That's not the topic for today. What we are really talking about is the God of Islam the same as God of Abraham? How do you get to know who God of Abraham is? Well, you pick up the primary source of information for Abraham, for his relationship with Abraham, which is the Bible. That's where you begin. What did Muhammad do? He didn't even go there predominantly. He stuck with the Quran and the Quranic ideas. And in other words, he has completely ignored the biblical narrative of what happened with Abraham. So he challenged and he said, God never came and met Abraham. Let me read clearly. Genesis chapter 18. Then the Lord Yahweh appeared to him in the terebinth trees of Mamre. And so he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And then if I could skip a few verses, it goes on to say, then the men arose from there and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham? And he continues with a particular conversation. And then it says 20, and the Lord's, 22. Then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. The Lord appeared, men are leaving, but Abraham still was standing before, face-to-face conversation is what Abraham is engaging with. And then it goes on to say, and then Abraham came near and said, if God were speaking from there, what is this came near and said? Came near and said. And then I'm going to skip a few verses. And then towards the last, it says, so the Lord went his way. Well, if he never came, where was he going? What does it mean when it says went his way? So in other words, I really don't care how much Muhammad reads from outside of the Bible if he doesn't read from the Bible. I really recommend God of the Bible came and met Abraham in person. So in other words, in only 1 or 2 areas where he really wanted to deal with the difference, he has got things wrong. God comes into the earth, sits with Abraham, has food with Abraham, dinner with Abraham. Islamic Allah is a distant dictator, and the difference still is true. And so I'd really like Mohammed to address these things. 5 specific points, please address. What Mohammed has done is a classic thing among Muslims. Completely ignore the Bible, except to read 1 or 2 verses here and there, just to affirm Islamic view. Completely ignore the Bible. Otherwise, I have presented details after reading the Bible in detail. Why do the Muslims do this? This is very unfortunate, because the Bible has very rich manuscriptal evidence. Dead Sea Scrolls, Septuagint, Masoretic text, Vulgate, Bomberg's edition, and so on for the Old Testament, the Torah. Very rich manuscriptal evidence. No manuscriptal evidence for an imaginary Bible that affirms the Quran, which Muhammad has in his mind, which doesn't talk about the things I'm talking about. Bible is preserved by a nation with professional scribes. Bible was preserved by a nation which saw signs and wonders quite consistently. No one claimed of Bible corruption before Islam came into the picture. No one really dared. That wasn't even on the table. Quran comes from an environment of not much general rigorous scrutiny. Not much scrutiny in an arid nomadic background. They can claim whatever they want to claim. Add to that, Quran comes from an environment where there is no public verifiable sign performed, even through self-admission. And I can give examples. Time and time again, people go and ask Muhammad, can you show a sign? He runs away, no sign. Can you show a sign? Runs away, no sign. So nothing to be believed based on the Quran. Quran was rejected by the Jews of that time. Quran comes from an environment where there was physical coercion. So no wonder people in some stage began following, but through physical coercion. In other words, and Quran clearly has manufactured history about Abraham and so on. So we get to know through a discussion on Hajj, for which we have absolutely no historical evidence going before the time of Islam. So Muhammad, if you want to talk about God of Abraham, read from the Bible as the primary resource. If you haven't, if you refuse to, you're not dealing with the topic. Challenge still stands. 5 specific points. Reconcile those attributes, please.
It's time. Okay, thank you, Brother Arul. Moving over to Mohammed now. Just let me know.
Just give me a second. All right, okay, I'm gonna start now.
Okay.
All right, so Arul didn't address any of my points. He just pushed them away. He brought up his presentation and repeated that. I'm not sure why. I already said that I will address his points in the rebuttal, but that was not my rebuttal. What you were supposed to do, Arul, was address the points that I provided. You started saying that I didn't look at the primary text. Of course I looked at the primary text, but I gave exegesis with the primary text. What exegesis have you provided from the Hebrew Bible or from the Jewish exegesis to prove what you believe? You made this statement about the topic is about the God of Abraham. Well, yeah, you believe that the God of Abraham is the Trinity, so it's directly relevant. You believe that the God of Abraham allows human sacrifices, so it's directly related to the topic. So I challenging you, and this challenge still stands, that you have to prove to the audience, prove to yourself that the God you believe in is the same God as the one Abraham worshipped. And I did talk about relational stuff with with Allah. I gave the Hadith Qudsi. I gave the Quran verses about how near he is to us. I went through the 6 pillars of Iman to show, because they answer the questions of who God is. How can you have a relationship with someone who, who you don't know who he is, and so on and so forth. But coming to your stuff, you said you're comparing apples and apples. Let me find that note. All right. Oh yeah, so I already addressed this non-existent thing. Allah exists. You can see the Arabic translation of the Bible. He came to Abraham and appeared. I've already addressed that in my opening statement. He did not appear. I want you to address my exegesis. I provided an exegesis about why it's a poetical device, why Abraham didn't actually appear to him. I provided citations for who appeared. Yeah, that it was angels. When you talk about the Lord went his way, that was Raphael. You can see this in Bava Metzia. Okay, 86b. I provided the reference. Give me references about why it's the Lord. Okay, don't just do superficial reading of the Bible and interpret it willy-nilly. I'm interpreting it from oral tradition of the Jews. Okay, unless you're telling me that your interpretation supersedes 4,000 years of Jewish exegesis, then that's something else. Because you even said, ask the Jews. Well, I've asked the Jews, and I've looked at their exegesis. When you're talking about, oh, Abraham already believed in God, well, obviously he's a prophet, but his father, Terah, was a polytheist. In Quran 37, verse 111, Ibrahim alayhi salam is called a mu'min, so one of the righteous believers or righteous servants. Yeah, so Allah is known as a servant of God. What else did you? Okay, not done that one. Okay, so you talked about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam being a mercy for all the worlds. That's not for him. This is Allah providing the last prophet as a mercy to the world, so that his message can go through the whole world, so that he can connect with the entire world. This is not centralized on Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because this is why we say La ilaha illallah. This is why this is the most important thing for us. There is no God but Allah. It's just you know, I don't know what to say to that. You said that God didn't want anything, but no. This is when you read Genesis 14:23. It's not God speaking here. It's Abraham. Abraham said to the king, what do you call it? Don't give me anything. This is not a command from God. So you're misquoting the Bible. You mentioned chapter 66, verse 2, about the disillusion of oaths in the Quran. Did you read the tafsir and see what it's about? It's about the honey. It's when he had an argument with his wives and he said, I'm not going to have this honey anymore. Allah is addressing him and saying, it's basically telling him, don't make what's halal for you forbidden. Don't make up your own things. So he said, you should have the honey. This is all it's about. It's not about breaking promises willy-nilly. Find me a tafsir that says you can break oaths willy-nilly. In fact, in chapter 5, verse 73, it says very specifically that Allah holds you to your oaths. And your most important oath, which is called aqd in Arabic, which is the root for aqidah, is the oath that you will worship Allah alone. And he himself never breaks his promise. And he mentions this in the Quran. What else did you mention? You mentioned, the marriage to the adopted wife. First of all, he's not his blood relative. So he's marrying someone who hasn't been married to your who's been married to someone who's not related to you is fine. It's not a problem. Find me in the Old Testament where it says you can't marry someone who's been married to someone who's not your relative. In fact, and this idea of marriage and divorce is common in the Old Testament. If you read in Deuteronomy, I believe 22 or 24. Let me see if I can bring the reference. I do have it here. Come on. There we go. I forgot 4 minutes. That's plenty of time. Okay. Yeah, so Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 to 4, he actually talks about a woman who's being given a bill of divorce, okay, that she can marry someone else afterwards. The only difference between Islam and what's written in Deuteronomy is that if that marriage fails, the woman can go back to the man she was married to before. But again, this is all progressive revelation. All you're providing is progressive revelation. This idea of, like I said, the booty that Muhammad received during warfare. Again, we see this in the Old Testament. We see that other people who worshipped God, the God of Abraham, did acquire booty when they went to war. You're talking to me about reading the Bible, but I don't think you have either, because this is known from the Old Testament that booty was acquired. So again, but you haven't answered any of my points. You talked for 10 minutes, but didn't answer any of my questions. So I will repeat again. Show me Abraham worshiping the God that you worship. Yeah. You talked about this covenant, the everlasting covenant, and you mentioned that this is not applied to you. I mean, isn't God the God of mankind? Show me an exegesis where it says that this is only applicable to the Jews, you know, and not the Gentiles. Okay. In fact, it would be applicable to the Gentiles and the Arabs as well, because Ishmael is a son of Abraham. Okay, the everlasting covenant was going to go through his descendants forever. Okay, so you need to provide an exegesis where it claims that you are exempt from this, according to Abraham, not according to Paul. Okay, so you were talking about the Kaaba and the history of the Kaaba. Well, if you actually read in Kitab Akhbar Mecca, written by the historian Mohammed Abd Al-Razack in volume 1, page 165, he actually talks about the interior of the Kaaba during pre-Islamic times. And he says, and I quote, and they put on its columns pictures of the prophets, pictures of trees and pictures of angels. And there was a picture of Prophet Ibrahim, Khalil ar-Rahman, the friend of the most merciful. This is a quote from a historian, okay? So you're talking about, read in Exodus 5:1, okay? The Hebrew is Hajj. And when you go to the Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon on page 260, it actually quotes Exodus 5:1 and relates it to the Arabic word Hajj, meaning, and I quote, to go to Mecca as a Hajj or pilgrim to keep the public festival. So this idea of Mecca not existing, it's mentioned in Hebrew lexicons. It's mentioned in Exodus 5:1, the term Hajj. It's the existence of the Kaaba and who it was built by was known by the pre-Islamic Arabs. I have a minute. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that addresses the thing. When it comes to Ismail alayhi salam, now this idea of, when we see it doesn't make sense in the Old Testament. Why? Because we see in Genesis 16:10, 17:20, 21:13 and 21:18 that it's Ismail that's talked about to have been blessed with his seed being multiplied. And the same statement is being repeated in Genesis 22:17, which is supposedly applied to Isaac. Now, however, you could say in Genesis 26:4, Isaac is also told that he would have offspring as numerous as the stars of the heaven. Except look at the population. The Arabs far greatly outnumber the Jewish population. So again, it just doesn't add up. And then you put this red herring about I'll mention it in the next one.
You can have 20 seconds to close your statement. That's
yeah,
fine.
okay. And you mentioned about the corruption of the text. That's a red herring. I never made that point. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. Okay. So just following on from this now, there'll be a second round of rebuttals going over the first pieces of argumentation. Each side will be given 5 minutes apiece to provide a rebuttal offered up by the other side. And so in your own time, Arul, let me know when you're ready.
Cool. I'm ready. I can start now.
Okay.
Muhammad is really tempting me. He asked me, do I believe in the same God as the God of Abraham? I'd like to say yes, but that's not the topic for today. Do you, Islamic Allah, is he the same as God of Abraham is the question that we are debating about, not who I think God is. So let's make sure the topic is clearly in our minds. You present evidence from some Jews, exegesis, and he's complaining, I'm not providing any of them. Well, I can bring to you Jews who even claim God doesn't exist. Does that mean God doesn't exist? The question isn't, do some Jews say this, do some other Jews say that, and so on. The question is, you asked me to read the exegesis. I'd like to ask you to read the Bible. When did you do it? I read from Genesis chapter 18. God comes, appears, Abraham speaks to him, God then moves, Abraham then, you see all the geographical, positional, relational words used in the entire passage. I'd like you really to read. So God of the Bible is someone who comes and shows up. Now, let's leave that all aside. I gave you a list of 5 specific points. I'd really like you to get to the bottom of the differences that I have presented. Really, the differences. If you can please address them, reconcile all of them. Remember, even if there is one difference, they are still different gods. I want all of them addressed. You can say, in the interest of time, you can only address 5 of them, 10 of them, that's fine. But if you can please take your best shot, that would really be great. Let's pick 2 in specific, maybe in the interest of time. Deal with 2, please. Muhammad is a mercy for the entire world. Let me read to you. Salvation through the seed. Abraham, God said, Genesis 12, verse 3. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And then what happens? Genesis 21. God asks Abraham to send Ishmael away. Sorry, God says Ishmael is not the guy. Now, he ought to be cast off. And then this is the exchange of communication there. Therefore, she said to Abraham, Sarai said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son. For the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice. For in Isaac your seed shall be called. The seed that is going to be blessing to all the nations, not via Ishmael, via Isaac. Explain to me when we are expecting that blessing to the entire world via Isaac. Who is Muhammad? He seems to be a usurper. How do you reconcile this? He ought to be seen as someone who is a rebel, someone who goes against the God of Abraham, regardless of whether he got his counting table right. We're not asking if 1 is 1, if 2 is 2. We're not counting how many gods there are. We're asking who is that one God. And that one God, the plan is via Isaac, salvation unto world. If Muhammad says he is a mercy unto the whole world, obviously he has got the wrong idea. Now, another thing, that's one. Please reconcile. If you take just these 2, that'll be great. The second one, you said you can get married to a woman who was married before. Well, that's not the point. The point is, while someone is married to someone, can you lust after her and take her? That is the question. What did Abimelech, the king of Philistines, without knowing it was wife of Abraham, he said he really wanted to take Sarah. And what does God say? God, Genesis 20, verse 3. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. Sarah is not divorced yet. Man's wife you can't take. What does Quran say? 33:37. When you said to one on whom Allah bestowed favor, Muhammad lusts after his adopted son's wife while she was still married, and Allah says, oh, don't worry, if you like her, take her. Keep your wife and fear Allah while you conceal. Don't try to conceal this lust. Be open. And Allah is saying, all that you need to do, Quran 33:37, all that you need to do is really sign the papers. But the challenge I'm saying is, while she was still the wife, how did he lust? The same thing Abimelech did. God said, you are a dead man. Please address these 2. Reconcile them for me, please.
Let me know when you're ready, Mohammed.
All right, yeah, forgot to unmute myself. All right, okay. Yeah, ready to go. Okay, so again, he wants to avoid the Trinity and the crucifixion. Why? Despite me clearly saying that it's related. It is related. Is you claim, yes, I worship the same God, as the God of Abraham, that the same God that Abraham believed. Well, show me where Abraham believed what you believe. This is the challenge. I've shown that the God I believe is the God that Abraham and Muhammad, peace be upon him, both worshipped, by showing that the 6 pillars of Iman were believed by both of them and applied by both of them. Now, again, you're talking about this, again, you haven't addressed my points. You've just been going back on the things. You haven't provided any answers to any of the questions I provided. I went through all your points. I went through all 5 of your points and reconciled them. I talked about the progressive revelation. I talked about why Allah allows marriage to an adopted son, and I reconciled it with Deuteronomy 24. I've already answered these questions. You are clearly not listening to me, yeah, which is disrespectful. And what's even more disrespectful is that you haven't answered any of my questions. So again, I will ask you again. Oh, I'm talking about this directional stuff, where we read in Genesis 3:8 that they heard the voice of, they heard the sound of the Lord moving about in the garden. This is directional also. But when we read in Radak on Genesis, it talks about it's simply his voice, so that they can, well, actually, this is in Safaria, the way I've read it. In the Americans, in the, in the American Standard Version, it says, and they heard the voice of God walking in the garden. Okay, so this is what it says in that version. But when you read it from the Hebrew, it's merely mentioning about his voice being directional, not he himself. So again, you're talking to me about, not reading the Bible, but I've read the Bible and I've read the exegesis. You've only done one, and superficially, which is why you've misquoted some of the verses. I don't know what much more I can say with 2.5 minutes, because you haven't addressed anything for me to go back on. So again, I will ask you, prove to us that the God of Abraham is the God that you worship, yeah? The God that we should be following. Prove to us that the God of Abraham is the God that allows human sacrifice. Prove to us that the God of Abraham that only allowed circumcision for the Jews, despite Abraham himself not being a Jew, okay? And I even mentioned that that he had 2 sons, from which came the Arabs and the Jews. You didn't even address that. So hence why we get circumcised. Remember, it's an eternal, everlasting covenant, and yet the Muslims get circumcised. This is what the God of Abraham wanted. Okay, so I don't know what you're on about. You haven't addressed, let's see what else. What else haven't you addressed? Yeah, you haven't even addressed why the God of Abraham actually believes in the 6 pillars of Iman. Why does he believe in the 6 pillars of Iman? Why does he believe in the oneness of God? Not how you believe, but how we believe. Why does he believe in everything that Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught as the foundation of faith and the foundation of how you relate to God? Even when you talk about the 13 principles of Maimonides, the first 4 are about the relationship with God, and they actually address some of these questions. And then it goes on about the scriptures. There are a lot of similarities between Islam and the 13 principles of faith. Address that. Why is that the case? Okay, why is that not found in Christian creed, despite the claim that they worship the God of Abraham? You try to have a go at me for the history of the Kaaba. Well, I've presented to you the history of the Kaaba from a historian and from a lexicon on Exodus 5:1, where the Jews, this is not an Arabic lexicon, this is a Hebrew lexicon written by Jews. And it mentions Mecca very explicitly. So address that. So what does God like and dislike? Well, he likes that we obey him. This is why it is mentioned that Abraham not only believed in the Lord, but he fulfilled all the commandments. So Abraham believed that in order to have a good relationship with God, you have to follow what he commanded you to. Yeah, polygamy was fine. He understood justice and so on and so forth. But please, when it comes to the next section, address my questions, because I will press you on it.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. Okay, moving on to the next section now, which should be probably a little bit more lively. It's our cross-examination section, which gives each side a chance to ask 4 consecutive questions, but one at a time. So 1 question, 1 answer, 1 question, 1 answer. The time for question will be 1 minute. Then the responder will be allowed 2 minutes, followed by a consecutive 1 minute to the questioner to give comment on the answer given. So 4 of these, okay. If Brother Arul would like to open first.
Cool, yeah. If you're ready, Mohammed, yeah.
Oh yeah, bring it.
Okay, first question. Let me read from the text itself. But God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice. For in Isaac your seed shall be called. The eternal salvation plan for all of the world is via Isaac. This is Genesis 21:12. Muhammad wants to take that place, and he even goes on an anti-Jewish rant. Quran 5:51. Oh, you who believe, take not the Jews and Christians for friends. Question. In a Jew, in a person from Israel, you ought to see the eternal mercy for the world. Muhammad is a fake one. How do you reconcile these two?
Yeah, okay. I have 2 minutes to answer this, right?
2 minutes, correct.
Okay, cool, perfect. Okay, so I'll address the last thing you mentioned, chapter 5, verse 51. If you read the tafsir, again, exegesis, very important. It mentions this about warfare, okay? Do not take these people as allies during warfare because they're probably going to turn against you. And this is proven throughout the history of the life of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, for which these verses were revealed in these circumstances. This is why we have Asbab al-Nuzul. Now, you mentioned about the seed being, what do you call it, the salvation of the world. Well, since you're a Bible-only person and you don't go into exegesis, I can simply say that nowhere here does it claim in the text that the seed of Isaac is the salvation of the world. The text that you have read, it doesn't say that. You know, you've read it out for us. It doesn't say the seed of Isaac is the salvation of the world. If it's in the text, you can correct me. You know, I'm not beyond making mistakes. But from what you have read to us, it's not there. So I'm using your approach now of simply going with the text and not exegesis.
Okay, Arul.
Yeah.
Next question.
Are you done?
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Sorry, I presumed you were finished, Mohammed. Sorry, just please let me signal when you're finished.
I'm done with my answer.
Okay. So yeah, Arul, 1 minute for a comment back.
Quickly, the text says, for whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. So Muhammad did not just reject it, he also became anti-Jewish, according to your own confession in a public debate like that. He saw Jews as people who are not with him, which is for a very valid reason, but he took offense because of that. So no reconciliation I see there. Okay, can I move on to my question now? Please. Yeah. All right, question. Adopted son was still married to this person. Muhammad comes, lusts after her, and he realizes it's a problem. And then Allah says, oh, this is not a problem. Don't try and restrain. Keep your wife and fear Allah. Quran 33:37. For you fear the people while Allah has more right than you fear him. So when Zaid had no longer any need of her, as long as he doesn't need her anymore, we married her to you in order that there may not be there not be upon the believers any discomfort concerning the wives of their adopted sons. Bible says, indeed you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. Question, do you think you would be happy if you were, for example, married, that someone else can lust after that woman? Is that appropriate, you think?
Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, where did you get this idea of he was lusting after her? That doesn't happen. In fact, Rasulullah, when Zayd came to him, telling him about this divorce, he said, fear Allah and go back to your wife. This is what he told him. He didn't say, yeah, go and divorce her, I want her. No, that's not what happened. He said, fear Allah and go back to your wife. Okay, this is what he told him. But when Zayd radiallahu anhu went through with the divorce at a later time, then Allah revealed this verse and said, she is halal for you. You are allowed to marry her, okay? Because she was married to someone that is not a blood relative of the Prophet ﷺ. So you're misinterpreting our exegesis of this verse and misinterpreting what happened in that narrative. And I also reconciled it with Deuteronomy 24, where a person can go and marry someone else's thing. But it was your assumption that she was still married to him. No, he married her after they got divorced. And the reason they got divorced is not because Muhammad SAW lusted after her. That is a lie. It is because Zayd no longer wanted her. This is what it says clearly in the text. How much time do I have to answer?
Yeah, 40 seconds.
40 seconds, all right. Because I finished with this answer, so I quickly want to address the previous comment that, well, now it's gone out of my head, to be honest.
30 seconds, man.
Doesn't matter. That wasn't the agreed format, Mohammed. Ask question.
All right, fair enough, yeah.
Okay. Brother Arul for comment. Minutes comment.
Why do I think Muhammad lusted when Zayd was still married? It's what the text says. It says, so when Zayd had no longer any need of her, we married her to you. So in other words, as long as he does that, you can get married to her. So the thought was in obviously Muhammad's mind. So clearly, Muhammad's morality, Islamic Allah's morality, is irreconcilable with the morality of the God of the Bible. Very clearly. So again, two different gods. Question number 3, please.
Okay.
God of the Bible, God of Abraham, at crucial junctures, when he wants to take massive changes, massive shifts in gear, goes with a covenant. That's what he did with Abraham. That's what he did with Moses. And that's what he did with Jesus. Massive changes, covenants. You think with Muhammad came a massive shift. What precise covenant with a sacrifice happened?
First of all, I never claimed that there was a massive shift in anything. I did claim progressive revelation. And one of the progressive revelation is because the Quran came to address all of mankind, not just the children of Israel. There was no longer to be a sacrificial system. The only time we sacrifice any animals is on Eid al-Adha. What do you call it? Because to commemorate the saving of Ismail alayhi salam during that test. So this is why we do it, and the meat goes to the poor. And Allah says very clearly in the Quran that it's not the blood of the animal that suffices Allah, it's the piety, it's the act of us worshiping him, doing as he commands. This is what reaches him, it's not the blood. So it's very clear that you're trying to say, well, because the Old Testament says something, it has to apply to the Quran, because despite millennia apart and despite being addressed to two different audiences. What we read in Genesis is addressed to the children of Israel. What we read in the Quran is addressed to mankind as a whole. So if you have mankind having to sacrifice animals all the time, we won't have anything to eat. It makes no sense. And it mentions the tabernacle in the Quran. So it acknowledges this history of the children of Israel. But it's simply no longer applicable. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with progressive revelation? I don't see anything with that. You yourself believe in progressive revelation. And that's my answer.
You claiming that no massive shift happened? You claim that prior revelations was only to Israel, Muhammad to all the world. That's a massive shift. And you are asking me why covenant was still required. The covenant was still required because that's not dependent on the audience. That's with the nature of the God of Abraham. Abraham didn't tell, please give me a covenant. God gave it. So we are trying to understand if Islamic Allah is the same as God of Abraham. It is in the nature of God of Abraham to always start off massive deals with a covenant. We don't see that with Islam, and obviously irreconcilable, not God of Abraham. Final question.
Yes.
Final question, please. You went through all sorts of texts. You refused to read from Genesis 18 for some reason. You read all sorts of other texts. You refused to read Genesis 18. That's fine. No problem. Let me read to you the experience of Hagar. Hagar actually met God, and then she gave a name to God. The name was El Roi, you are a God who sees me. And the Hebrew in the Bible says, then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are the God who sees. And then it explains, for she said, have I also here seen him who sees me? Hagar claims, according to the Bible, that she has seen God, the one who she expected to see her. Do you at least agree with Hagar that she saw God? Sorry. Do you at least agree with her?
Okay, no, of course not, because I've mentioned explicitly from the text that God does not come. He is not seen. I've mentioned from the exegesis that he is not to be seen. When he sends someone, it's a messenger. When she calls him, the one, you are the God who sees, that doesn't mean he's appeared. When she says that, I have seen your glory, or I've seen you, I'm paraphrasing, what do you call it? It's a poetic literary device. You need to understand how the Jews understood the text. It's not how you understand it, because then you're falling into anachronism. Okay, you're reinterpreting the text for other people. So you have to prove to me that this is not a poetic literary device. Okay, you can't just read from the text and say, oh, look, this is what the text says, therefore I'm going to take it literally. Because if you're going to take, something like that literally, then explain to me, what does it mean when it talks about, the apple of the apple of God's eye, for example? Okay, what does that mean? Okay, if you're going to talk about text literally. Yeah, so that's my answer. It's a poetic literary device. She didn't actually see him. And this is, I've been challenging you all the time to provide me exegesis where the Jewish oral tradition or Jewish commentary agrees with you, but you haven't done it. You haven't done it. That's my answer.
Final comments from Arul, please.
Yeah.
So what you've done there is you're really saying what it says isn't what it really says. That's what you've said. And that's a bit mysterious to me. And so how do you know what the commentaries say? Maybe you should not read the commentaries as what it says. Reject what it says. Reject it. So again, God who shows up, Hagar sees, that's not the Islamic Allah of the Quran. And therefore, on any count, Islamic Allah of the Quran of Muhammad is not the God of Abraham. And that has been verified through your answers and through all your arguments so far.
Okay, now it's Mohammed's time to ask his questions. 1 minute to answer. Arul 2 minutes to reply, and then Mohammed another minute to offer comment on that reply for questions in your own time. Mohammed.
Sure, no problem. All right, so Arul, considering, like I said, I will press you on everything that you did not respond to. Okay, so first and foremost, most important thing is what you believe. You claim to believe in the same God as the God that Abraham believed in. So again, I will ask you, show me where Abraham believed that God was a Trinity, and show me where Abraham believed that God would allow for a human sacrifice, despite the many texts that I cited proving otherwise. That's my question.
You can't ask me 10 questions and expect
I asked you two that you've not addressed at all at the same time. I have a minute to ask my question, so please respond.
Okay, I'll start again.
Just to clarify, one question apiece, gentlemen, and then we progress through.
I'll try and answer the first question alone. Yeah.
All right, fine. Answer the first question.
So you said, I believe in God of Abraham. I agree, but that's not the topic for today. You're asking questions outside of the topic. The question you're asking now is the God of Abraham Trinity? Yes, he is. Genesis 18, Lord Yahweh comes, 3 men, all 3 Abraham bows toward, all 3. It doesn't say he bowed only towards one of them, all 3. And then it says further down that 2 of them left, and it describes the 2 who left as angels. And the one who was still remaining is referred to as the one Abraham was speaking to as Lord Yahweh still. So in other words, Lord Yahweh, God of Abraham, for some reason showed up as three people, Yet Abraham didn't care to distinguish, even though one person could holistically represent Yahweh. So is God of Abraham Trinity? Yes, he is. But let me remind you, that is not the topic for today. The topic for today rather is the Islamic Allah God of Abraham? And there we clearly said, as long as God of Abraham showed up in front of Abraham, which he did, which you refuse to read, Genesis chapter 18, then Islam has no place. I can argue with you for how many ever hours and days do we need to argue. I'm willing to share with you the Christian theology, but Islam does not have a place. As long as we can quickly agree on that, no problem.
You answered?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. So again, talking about superficial reading, and I want people to recognize that the exegesis that I brought up, referring to the three men who were angels, and I specifically identified who the Lord is that you're talking about as Raphael, okay, who left, because Raphael was the one that was to give the news about Isaac. Michael and Gabriel were sent to Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot, okay? And I cited the evidence for that. You didn't address my evidence. So I've already provided that the God of Abraham was not a Trinity. You keep bringing up Genesis 18, but he was not a Trinity. And I cited why it's not a Trinity. So this, you saying that Islam is not compatible with Christianity is, you have been able to give no citation whatsoever that provides your, outside of the Bible that explains this thing, this event, that is a Trinity. So no. And I specifically provided 1 Kings 8:27, which attests to that.
Okay, next question.
Okay, so next question, you already know is coming. Prove to us that the God of Abraham believed that God himself will die for the sins of mankind, despite him not allowing him to sacrifice his son, despite him saying throughout the Old Testament that he will not allow human sacrifice in any way, shape, or form, whether it's to him, whether it's to Moloch, and I've cited 5 or 6 verses to that effect. So prove to me, prove to yourself, prove to the audience that the God of Abraham wanted and approved human sacrifice for the sins of the guilty.
Arul, to respond in your own time.
Well, okay, 2 minutes to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Does God of Abraham like sacrifice? Yes, he does. Otherwise, he would not have even asked Abraham to begin with. If you know anything about the Bible, God of the Bible does not do anything which is unrighteous, even to ask experimentally. He doesn't do it. And so the very fact that he asked means it's permissible. But then he didn't allow that to happen because he essentially was saying, I would give my own son. I don't want your son. So that's very important. Now, did God expect God himself to come and die as a sacrifice? Yes, of course. This is deep theology. I can give you a lecture. As a matter of fact, just last week, we had a massive lecture on why the Messiah is God. The Messiah is clearly understood to be God if you go through Hebrew scriptures carefully. That's not the subject for today's discussion, but for anyone who is interested in knowing that detail, please, Muslims especially, go through the other references, other videos that are available on this channel. Please subscribe. Please peruse those other videos, especially the last one, the last seminar, which happened just the last week, and that'll explain. The Messiah is God. Isaiah 53, Zechariah 14, Ezekiel 24, plenty of details to bring together. Messiah is God. Isaiah 53 goes on to talk about how the Messiah was expected to die. So God was expected to die. That was the plan of God according to Hebrew scriptures. Wasn't the topic for today, but I'm still explaining these because I think this is very important for all Muslims.
Right. Well, I asked about the messiahship of Jesus and what do you got? That was a previous question, you know, about him, about is the God of Abraham the Trinity, and then you answered that. You talked about Abraham sacrificing, you know, other things. I was very specific. Did he allow human sacrifice? And I specifically mentioned about the 5 or 6 verses that I cited from the Hebrew text, from the Hebrew scriptures, that condemn human sacrifice. And again, you've just, you know, ignored these texts, addressed these texts. Why does God say, do not sacrifice your children, do not sacrifice humans? Why does he condemn this act? Why does he abhor it? You haven't actually addressed that. You went on and started talking about, oh, I can give you a lecture and advertising the channel and all of this stuff, but you haven't actually asked and addressed these verses. Addressed, you know, we already know that this was a test for Abraham. You know, that's why he didn't allow the sacrifice. But you know.
Next question, Mohammed.
All right. So next question. Okay. So I went through my in the rebuttal. I went through the reconciliation of how we do. You know what you've presented. You know what the God of Abraham does and what the God of Muhammad does, and I explained why the differences occur as well. But what you haven't addressed is, why does the God of Abraham believe in the 6 pillars of faith that we find in Islam? That was my main argument, and I broke it down, and you didn't say a peep about it. So I would like you to address why the God of Abraham believed in the 6 pillars of Iman.
Can I answer? Mohammed, I don't think you're understanding the basic way logic works here. And the way it works is, merely because you see a few things similar in 2 different entities, it does not mean they are both the same. As long as you see even one thing different between them, it means they are different. So my focus really in addressing the topic for today is in looking at the differences. As long as I can cite a few differences and establish them to be genuine differences, I don't care in how many other ways they might look similar. I'm not even caring to address them, because the way logic works, I have pointed out the differences. You haven't addressed them. I don't even have to talk about the similarities which you might have in mind. I'll give you a simple example. 2 cars, 4 tires each. Look at the 4 tires. Maybe they are the same make, same manufactured batch. They might look similar. You're pointing to the 4 tires and saying, oh, look, the tires are similar and therefore the cars are the same. I am saying, well, the tires are similar, but the cars are standing in different places. And therefore, given the dissimilarity that they occupy different places, overall, the 2 cars are different cars. That's the logic I've used. Islamic Allah is not God of Abraham, because there are attributes which are very different. And as long as I can, do I still have 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Yes.
As long as I have done that successfully, which I believe I have done, and you haven't addressed the dissimilarities, then essentially what we have done is you have agreed Islamic Allah is not the God of Abraham. God of Abraham came and met him in person. Islamic Allah could never ever come. All that you have been arguing against is the text of the Bible. You were saying, well, the text says this, but it didn't happen.
All right. Well, so it seems like you're agreeing with me that there are similarities, and I was very specific to the 6 pillars of faith. And you said, okay, well, you know, there's similarities. So, okay, so I don't really know how to respond to someone who agrees with me. But to address the differences, again, like I said, when we talk about the Trinity, you weren't able to provide anything except repetition of Genesis 18, whereas I provided citations of Jewish sources. Okay, at the end of the day, we're looking at the Hebrew text. We're looking at the Hebrew Bible. So we are not going to be going by a Christian superimposed exegesis, especially one that's not cited. I've addressed the, you know, the points you've raised. I don't know why you're saying I haven't. Well, yeah, I mean, how do you respond to someone that has agreed with you? So you're basically saying that he did believe in the 6 pillars. He did believe in the oneness of God. He did believe in prophets and angels and revelation, the day of judgment. So, yeah, I mean, if you agree with that, that's great.
Okay, that's time. So do you want to ask your final question, Mohammed?
My final question. Okay. All right. This one is going to be about exegesis. Now, I've provided several exegesis as well as citations from the Bible itself. So I'll give you an opportunity again to answer one. And it is the most important one, which allows us to have that relationship in the first place. In Bava Messiah, 86b of the Midrash is very clear in Genesis 18:2 and Genesis 19:1, where the 2 depart and the 1 remains. It is very clear that all 3 are angels. This is very clear in the exegesis. Why are you disagreeing with the Hebrew exegesis and insisting that it is indeed the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit?
Okay, just to clarify, Mohammed, I never use the term Holy Spirit, Father and Son when it came to that text. You are putting words in my mouth. Please don't do that. Now, your question is, why do I disagree with the specific exegesis you have given? I disagree with the specific exegesis that you have given, regardless of who wrote it, because the specific exegesis that you have given disagrees with the simple text. You rightly point out, Genesis chapter 19, verse 1 says, and now the 2 angels came to Sodom. So 2 of them are angels. I agree. No, I mean that we agree. The point you are saying the 3rd one is also an angel. In that I disagree. Where do you get the information from? Is that anywhere in the text? Is there anywhere? If it is anywhere, please, in your 1 minute, please show me where it is in the text. Please don't throw me this exegesis, that exegesis, and so on. Read the text first. Why do I think God showed up? Because the text in simple manner says that. Genesis chapter 18, verse 1. Then Yahweh appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre. Positional, geographical. That's where he appeared. Who appeared? Yahweh. It's not saying angels, Yahweh. And so somehow in what was appearing in front of Abraham, there is Yahweh somehow. I don't know how. If you want to argue with me forever on that, we can. But somehow Yahweh was there. If an exegesis writer can't even grapple with that simple idea, throw that exegesis in the bin. It can't help you. Let's continue to read. What does Abraham do? So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold. So the Lord Yahweh appears. So he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing. So somehow in those 3 men, there is the manifestation of Yahweh. In other words, Mohammed, please explain to me 2 things in your response. Where do you see the 3rd one is an angel in the text somewhere? And then number 2 is, if you can, please, you don't have to, but if you can, and where I have clearly read, it is Yahweh who appeared. Where do you see it's not Yahweh?
Okay, well, I didn't realize in his response he can ask me questions back. Well, okay.
You don't actually. Yeah, that's not the.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
So you don't have to address it.
No, it's fine. It's not a problem. I never claimed in the first place. Well, first of all, I'll address his questions. Right? First of all, I never claimed that it was in the text. Okay. I was specifically asking him about the thing, but it's quite interesting because earlier when I asked you about the Trinity, you specifically referred to 3 men. Now I agree, you didn't actually say Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But I inferred that because of your comment of 3 men. When I asked you about the Trinity, you pointed this out. Well, he came as 3 men. Why 3 men? You were making this emphasis of 3 persons. So this is why I inferred from your response. But now you're telling us that yes, 2 of them were angels. So who is this one person? So who is this one being? You know, in fact, what you've done is concede that the Trinity did not appear to Abraham. Yeah, that Yahweh is not a Trinity. That's what you've done. Okay. And this is what you get from reading the text alone. I simply provided exegesis to enunciate and emphasize that point that the God of Abraham is not the God you believe in.
Thank you, Mohammed. Okay, we're now moving into the final closing stages as well, the last two sections, before we move on to Q&A for our audience on YouTube and tuned in around the world. So on this side, we will have 5 minutes per person for closing speeches, and then afterwards it will be Q&A. So those of you in the YouTube chat, this is 10 minutes for you to think about questions you might like to ask, okay? So Brother Arul, in your own time, are you ready to open up?
Okay, let me start now.
Okay, good.
Conclusion. Is God of Abraham the Islamic Allah who Muhammad claimed he spoke with? Is a very important question. Why is it important? Not just for the sake of debating. Muhammad, like I said earlier, is a wonderful man, very gentle man. We've met, had our conversations and so on. And I'm very glad to be able to sit with him and speak about these very important things. Why is this important? Because ultimately, the eternal destinies of human beings are at stake. If Islamic Allah is not the God of Abraham, the obvious conclusion is Muslims need to stop being Muslims. They have been deceived. Doesn't matter for how long. As long as they can stop the deception right now and come to the Bible. You saw what Muhammad did. Muhammad refused to read from the Bible, text from the Bible. He went to this and that and everywhere, but refused to read from the Bible. Most often, this happens with Muslims. One thing I recommend to Muslims across the world who might be watching us is, my dear friends, your lives are at stake. The plan that God of Abraham has is very simple for you and me, which is God eternal, Yahweh, God of Abraham, was willing to lay down the life of his own son for the sake of mankind, which was promised to Abraham. He said, in your seed, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That's the blessing given, not from the Arabs, not from Muhammad. I don't care if the Arabs are completely Ishmaelites, which they are not, obviously. If they are, they would still be speaking Hebrew, which they are not. So obviously they are a mixed people group, which don't necessarily just come from Abraham, and they are a completely different people group, mingled with all sorts of other people groups. The point is simple. When someone comes out of that and claims all sorts of fancy stuff going against clear revelation of God, especially the God of Abraham, who performed signs and wonders, gave a son when Abraham was 100 years old, miraculous sign. If Muhammad goes against him, reject Muhammad. I gave in very particular detail the differences, and I don't think Muhammad, the debate to Muhammad, has addressed these specific points. You can look at this for yourself. Moral character, God of Abraham, exemplary. He wouldn't want anyone to take anyone else's wives while they are still their wives. Never ever happened. But with Muhammad, please read it for yourself. The debate of Muhammad here says that never happened. Well, read it. Read the Islamic text for yourself. When did Muhammad, who you call a prophet, lust after his adopted son's wife for the very first time? When did he do that? And the Quranic text that I gave to you, what does it say about that? Read for yourself. God of the Bible gave covenants. He is he is someone who does everything legally binding. When he says things, he will do it. And the way we know that is he enters into a very explicit, very open covenant. Covenant is, by the way, contract, a detailed, elaborate contract. Build an altar, have offerings, and based on the blood that is shed, agree upon something, which is what God did with Abraham, which ultimately is what God did with his own son, Jesus Christ, on the cross. On the cross, from the seed of Abraham, from the seed of Isaac, from the seed of Jacob, from the land which is the promised land, Jesus came, and he went to the cross to save you and to save me, just as it was prophesied via Abraham. What did Muhammad do? All that he is trying to do is come in later, try to usurp what the devil did all through history. try and distort the plan of God. What does Muhammad do? Try and take people away from the plan of the God of Abraham, the only verifiable God. And he claims all sorts of things. Never ever was able to perform a sign to prove his claim. And therefore, I invite you to leave Islam, to reject Muhammad, to come to Jesus Christ, who alone is able to save. And the entire Bible testifies of this very thing. Seed of Abraham. It all began with Adam, seed of the woman. And he is available for you. Become Christians, enjoy your life, become friends with God. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mohammed, in your own time.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Give me a sec. Okay, Bismillah. Throughout this debate, I've noticed that Arul, despite being a good fella, a good interlocutor, thank you for that, hasn't addressed my points, and in fact agreed with me in saying that the presentation or the argument that I brought forth about the 6 pillars of faith was believed by Abraham. Now, he may disagree in some aspects of how these were applied by Abraham, but he hasn't been able to provide any evidence for it. Whenever he was challenged on it and provided exegesis, he simply waved it away. So this is a question to you guys that are watching. Why does a Christian need to simply wave away exegesis if it's, if that is the truth, if the truth of what they believe in, shouldn't it show up in exegesis? Now, this idea, the relationship of us and God, between us and God, the reason I picked the 6 pillars of Iman and our foundational creed to approach this debate is because it answers this. It answers how we have a relationship with someone, with God specifically. How do we have it? It's because first of all, we need to know who he is. Arul has been able to fail very spectacularly about proving that it was a Trinity, something that he believes, okay? So we know who God is. We know that God is the same God that was revealed to Abraham, Moses, Isaac, Jacob, and Jesus, as well as Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is a very main thing. You can't have a relationship with someone you don't know. How does he do certain things? Well, he sends his revelation through messengers. I provide the information also from both scriptures as well as exegesis. What does he do? Well, as Arul says, he provides, he has contracts with us. He has oaths. We have an oath with him that we will worship him alone. And he has his promises to us. But is it about human sacrifice? No, it's not, because we do not see that in the life of Abraham. We don't see that in the Old Testament, and we don't see that in the Quran. So and in fact, the covenant given to Abraham wasn't about sacrifice. It was about the circumcision. This is the covenant given to Abraham. And Muslims adhere to that, but Christians do not. So all of these similarities, and you can go back on this debate and recognize that these are similarities that I provided, okay? And the differences I've explained, the progressive revelation, and even the idea about, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam marrying the ex-wife or the divorcee of Zayd ibn Harith, radiallahu anhu. I've given a parallel to that in Deuteronomy. So the text of the Old Testament largely agrees with the text of the Quran and the narrations and the life of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Islam is not centralized around Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is merely the messenger. The Quran makes this explicitly. You are not but a messenger. And Tawheed is throughout. I gave an example where the very first chapter of understanding the names and attributes of God, knowing what he's like, because that's what the names and the attributes provide. They provide the information for who God is, what he does, what he's like. He is the most merciful. He is Al-Wudud, the all-loving, the most loving. He is the, Al-Haq, the truth. All of these names, these 99 names, provide us with that information of who God is, what he is, how to relate with him. and so on and so forth. So the question, and this is my request to you viewers, especially the Christians, ask yourselves, why do we realize, or why do we see that the relationship that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught to the Muslims is the same relationship that Abraham had with who the Jews and the Christians know as Yahweh? Why do we see the name Allah in the Arabic translations of the text, referring to the names and attributes that are given in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew? Why do we see all this? You know? Allah, God is in Arabic is Ilah, it's not Allah. Allah is only referred to the only true God. And it's gender neutral. So if it's applied to anyone else, it doesn't make sense. But that's the question for you guys. And thank you for this. This was very good. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, thank you both. Thank you both very much. Okay, and I hope people on the live chat on YouTube have had a good think about the questions that they'd like to ask, because now we're going into questions and answers. So please fire away.
Yeah, sure. How long do you want to give for questions?
Questions, maybe sort of
I don't mind. I mean, if you
10
get
minutes,
a lot,
15 minutes.
Mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine with me. I mean, what I would try to say is for the audience on YouTube is to try and truncate your questions a bit so that the people responding can respond in sort of 1 or 2 minutes. No more than sort of 2 minutes.
On topic.
And on
Yeah,
topic,
on topic,
yes.
definitely.
Keep them on topic, please. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, maybe 3 or 4, 3 questions maybe each.
Okay.
We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes.
Okay, right. So Mohammed, again, people, please
Just make sure
say, yeah, it says at Mohammed or at Arul, so it's pretty easy for me to read. So this question comes out from the user All Out for Christ. Why did Mohammed exegete the biblical scripture from a source to support his ideas, as opposed to then consensus on the subject? The third person to meet with Abraham was Yahweh.
I'm not quite understanding the question.
I can repeat the question if you want me to.
Yeah, go on, repeat the question for me.
It says, why did Muhammad exegete the biblical scripture from a source to support his ideas, as opposed to then consensus on the subject? The third person to meet with Abraham was Yahweh.
Right, okay. In terms of the exegesis, that is what he's asking about the exegete.
I believe so, yeah.
Right, okay. If I understand correctly, the exegesis of the Quran isn't, the prophetic commentary. You would see that it wasn't provided by anyone outside. In fact, the pagans of Mecca actually accused him of this, yeah, and they said that he's getting this exegesis from this man, and this is where he's actually getting the Quran itself from this man. And what you realize when you read the sources is that this man didn't know Arabic. He was a foreigner. In fact, the very first person, when it came to the revelation, the very first person that Muhammad SAW went to try and understand what was happening to him was Warqa bin Nawfal. And he was a Christian, yet he affirmed the prophethood of Muhammad SAW. He even said to him, he said, I fear the day that the people will rise up against you, because this is what happened to the previous prophets. And he actually, when he talked to him about the angel, he said, this is an-namus. This is the an-namus that came to Moses. So he's referring to the angel that came to Moses. And he was a Christian, but he affirmed this. The idea that Muhammad SAW got exegesis or plagiarized the Quran, so there is no evidence for it. Considering that he was illiterate, okay. Unfortunately, it wasn't a source provided for where he got this information from, but that's your answer.
Okay. I'm trying to balance it between questions for Arul and questions for yourself. So there's a lot of questions for you, Mohammed, but we really want people to question Arul as well. We really want, that's because we want a fair reflection coming in.
Well, the more questions for me means the more I can propagate Islam.
Okay. Okay. In the interim, Mohammed, if you don't mind, I'll ask you another one just while someone's preparing another question for Arul, because it hasn't been asked yet.
Sure.
Okay. This comes from Steve Piera. So the Quran clearly allows for marriage and divorce of children. taqiyya is allowed for Muslims by Allah, do you stand on these moral grounds?
Okay, so I believe he's referring to 65, chapter 65, verse 4. It
Correct.
talks about
Yeah.
marriage, right? Okay. Now, first of all, when you read the Arabic, it's talking about nisa'ikum, okay? The word for child is tafl, yeah? It's not nisa. Nisa is only applied for women, okay? So this is not talking about younger children. And again, what's happening here is the fallacy of presentism, okay? You see something happening today and you project it on the previous cultures and nations in ancient times and say, okay, well, what they've done is backwards. No, this is not how it works, okay? This was a common practice among the people, because even if we look at the criticisms of Quraysh at Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they never once mentioned the marriage to Aisha, okay, as a criticism. They didn't take that as a moral, absurdity or something immoral, yeah, despite disbelieving in his message. What was the second part to his question? Taqiyya, yeah, taqiyya.
Yeah, taqiyya, yeah, allowed.
Yeah, so taqiyya is forbidden in Islam, okay? Lying for the sake of religion is forbidden. There are only 3 instances where a person can lie, okay? And one is to reconcile between 2 people, okay, in goodness. One is to is when you fear for your life. So, for example, if someone's coming to kill you and you say, "Look, I'm not a Muslim," or or you have this, or they're coming to kill you for something that you identify yourself by, and you say no, that's allowed because your life, you're trying to save your own life. And the third one is lying to your wife in terms of saying, you look very beautiful today, where in reality you're thinking, nah, you could have looked better. Something to please. Yeah. So this idea of taqiyya that is being propagated as something that Muslims are supposed to lie consistently is actually forbidden in Islam. And even these 3 exceptions are very limited themselves.
Okay, thank you. There's a question for you, Arul, from Imran Saeed. At Arul, if the God of Abraham is one, you agree worship of 3, aka the Trinity, is false. Do you agree that if you're worshipping one God, then do you agree that the Trinity is false? I think is the long of the short there.
I think yes. Okay, I hear the question. I think the question is based on a very wrong assumption right at the outset. If you go on, you can go and ask any Christian who knows reasonably his scriptures. He would never say Trinity is 3 gods. Never would. A Muslim would picturize Trinity as 3 gods, and therefore your question of would you worship 3 would be valid. From an Islamic, if you didn't know, from a Christian perspective, we're talking about 1 God. What is Trinity? 3 gods, sorry, the 1 God in 3 persons. 1 God, 3 persons. Triune. In Trinity, both the 3 persons and the 1 God, both are important. Both are important. This is where, when Muhammad asked about Genesis 18, I answered earlier. The text says, then the Lord appeared to him. Yahweh appeared to him by the terebinth trees. And then Abraham lifts up his eyes and looks at them. 3 men were standing. I'm not saying by any stretch of imagination, 1 is the Father, 1 is the Son, 1 is the Holy Spirit. That's not my point. But my point is, for some reason, when it was supposed to be Yahweh who is supposed to stand in front, 3 men are standing. And listen to, see what Abraham did. Abraham, when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground to meet them and bow himself to the ground and said, my Adonai, bowing to all 3. I'm not saying those are Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That's not my point at all. But my point rather is this. 1 God is supposed to be visiting, which is what the text says. But for some reason, he wanted to show up as 3 men in this, in the first couple of verses. I'm not still going to the later part. In the first couple of verses, he's still showing up as 3 men. Abraham did not say, oh, you are Yahweh, the other 2 are angels, I'll just bow to him. I'll bow to the Yahweh. He didn't do that. He bowed down indiscriminately towards all 3 men. Angels are not supposed to be worshipped by men. Abraham would have known it, but still does that. So the point is, there is certainly complexity to the nature of God. One God, but in three persons. It is true that later on, two of them moved on as angels. But the question my point is not focused on that. My point really is focused on how come three men, and why did Abraham indiscriminately bow down towards all three? Went to them, bow down, yet address them as Adonai, one Lord, Adonai. And so the point is, if you go through scriptures, the Bible carefully, one God, three persons. Am I being wrong in worshiping one God in three persons? No, I am being exceedingly right. Triune is the nature of God. If you think God is a simpleton, simple unity, simpleton, you have terribly mistaken, especially when no one in Islam has met him. You better think twice, and you better come to the text, which is the Bible, where people have time and time again met God, spoken to him, engaged. Even Hagar saw him, spoke to him in person, and so on. So come to the text where you see people who have met God, who were able to testify that they had met God through the signs and wonders that they performed. So do I worship three gods? No, I don't. Do I worship one God? Yes, I do. Is that one God a simple unity, simpleton? No, he isn't. That one God is a very complex unity as revealed by the verifiably supernatural text, namely the Bible. Quran contradicts, but the Quran has nothing to back it up. No sign, no wonder. Please keep that aside. Don't follow it.
Okay, thank you. A question from Simons for Mohammed. Abraham kept the Sabbath as an eternal commandment. Why Muslims don't keep the Sabbath of the 10 Commandments? So why don't Muslims keep the Sabbath, really?
Yeah, okay. Well, this falls to progressive revelation, and also it was decreed that the Sabbath was for the children of Israel. It wasn't for the Gentiles. As I said before, that the Quran came for all of mankind. So this idea of the Sabbath has been done away with as part of that progressive revelation. Now, for the Muslims, the holy day is Friday rather than Saturday, as it was for the Jews, except we are not supposed to do any works. In fact, it clearly states in the Quran that when the call for prayer on Salat al-Jum'ah, on Friday prayer, is called, we drop everything and we go to pray. But after that, we go back to our worldly duties. So the Sabbath itself, like I said, it's progressive revelation. The God of Abraham decreed it for the children of Israel, and he did not decree it for all of mankind with the revelation of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Thank you. A question for Arul now. This comes from Minato Allah Soliman. It says, Arul, where do you get the idea that the Arabs are not the children of Ishmael?
Very good question. Ishmael is just one person. What is his mother tongue? His mother tongue should have been either Hebrew or the Egyptian language, the Egyptian original language, not Arabic. Arabic didn't exist at that time. One of those two should have been his language, because he was born to a mom who was Egyptian and who was born to a father who was a Hebrew. But the Arabs speak a completely different language called Arabic. In terms of the history of Arabs, in terms of evidence, we find the reference to Arabs for the very first time, sort of in similar timeline to similar times. The first one is actually from the Bible, which comes from around the time of Solomon, King Solomon. And if you read the text carefully there, Arabs are introduced as a mixed group. The very term actually means a mixed people group. And then you find outside of the Bible, in terms of archaeology, you find evidence for the Arabs from one of the Assyrian emperors. I believe, if I remember correctly, I think it is an Assyrian emperor, but at least it's related to a war campaign related to an Assyrian emperor. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact source, but one of the archaeological source again comes from just after the time of Solomon. The point is this: Ishmael, if all of Arabs were from Ishmael alone, they'd be called Ishmaelites. They'd be either speaking Hebrew or Egyptian, what you might call Coptic, perhaps, owing to the meaning of the term and the history of the term Coptic, which is the original native language of Egyptians. That's what should have happened. But with Arabs, that doesn't happen. They showed up much later as a mixed people group. So among Arabs, there could be, I'm not saying there isn't, there could be Ishmaelite blood. But I'd heavily doubt, I wouldn't say heavily doubt, but the point is, regardless, let's say any typical person among the Arabs can't confidently say, I have Ishmaelite blood, unless they have historical records tracing right the way back to Ishmael and evidence to prove that all these records were kept in timeline properly, which you don't. Arabs did not have those records. So no one can stand up and say, I have Ishmaelite blood. All the people can say is, I may have Ishmaelite blood, even including Muhammad, I may have, because in history, they never kept track. Some of them may have, some of them most likely did not. Ishmael, we have in the Bible information as to where he settled, nowhere in Saudi Arabia. You can read the details. Where did Ishmael settle? Very north, what is today southern Jordan. The Bible describes from the wilderness of Shur and then going up to Havilah is where they settled. Nowhere in the Arabian Peninsula in terms of the southern peninsula. So Arabs also come from there. There are plenty of different Arabs. So quick point is, any Arab can't confidently stand up and say, I am from Ishmael, because that history simply does not exist. And therefore, Muhammad can't do that either.
Okay, a question from Mohammed now from Sahih Luke. Allah is supposedly all-powerful. So is it possible for Allah to enter his own creation if he wanted to and if it pleased him so?
Okay, so this question of can God do anything comes up quite a lot. And the answer is yes, God can do anything that befits his majesty. There is that disclaimer, because when we get asked this question, oh, God can do anything, or told God can do anything, we usually throw back, can God cease to exist? Or can, and then you have the problem with, can God create a rock so heavy that he cannot lift it? These arguments never stand, because it defies who God is, the essence of God. Now, the essence of God is, as we read in the Quran, in the Hadith, as well as in the Old Testament, that the heavens and the earth cannot contain him. They cannot contain him, right? This is why I cited 1 Kings 8:27. So this idea of God, or Allah, entering the question does not befit his majesty, it does not befit his essence. Therefore, it is something that he will not do, okay? Because it doesn't befit him. So, it's the same, if I ask you the question, can God cease to exist? Can he just disappear and no longer exist? You'll say no. And then I'll just turn around and say, well, God can't do everything then, can he? So we have to be careful when we are approaching the question of what God does. We have to understand that if he does something, it has to be in line with his essence, with his attributes, with the way he operates. So inshallah, that answers the question.
Another question for Brother Arul. I presume it's directed to the Christian camp here, but it comes from Bukhar Lawan, and it says, is it the same God of Abraham that Jacob wrestled and defeated?
This is a typical misreading. Time and time again advanced by Muslims, because they do not read the text properly. Did Jacob meet the same God? Yes, he did. Did Jacob defeat him? No, he didn't. If you read the text carefully, what was the ultimate, the end point of the wrestling? It says God dislocated Jacob's hip. That's where it ended. With that, that's where the wrestling ended. So who won? A man with a dislocated hip, or God who didn't have anything dislocated? Who won? So the idea that somehow Jacob defeated, the point is simple. God showed up in person. And thank you, the person who has asked that question. At least you must see that God showed up in person. According to the Hebrew text there, the Bible, God showed up in person. and Jacob wrestled with him. And then Jacob goes on to say that I have wrestled with even God and survived, I think, if I remember correctly. That's something like that is what he would end up saying. So at the least, God of Abraham, God of Jacob, shows up on the face of the earth. How do I know? Because he has done that in the past. When he has done that in the past, how dare I tell him it's not befitting for him to show up? If I did that, I am being rebellious. So if Islam says that, like I said earlier, Islam says all sorts of rebellious things, including Muhammad claiming I am the mercy unto all the mankind, when clearly the blessing for all the world should come from Isaac. All sorts of rebellion has happened in Islam, and this is one such again. What is belittling God? Belittling, or what is not befitting of God? What is not befitting is what I force him to do when he doesn't want to do. God of the Bible, the one who showed up, the one who demonstrated through signs and wonders time and time again, it's called theophany, time and time again, showed up on the face of the earth. After he has done that, to say he can't do that, I'm plain simply going against scriptures. Yes, it is the same God, but ultimately it wasn't Jacob who won, but God still won. He dislocated the hip of Jacob.
Okay, great.
I wish that question was directed at me, because
Well, do you know what?
I wish various other questions were directed at me.
Okay. There is another one. Yeah, we've got one user just sort of spamming out the comments, asking the same question over and over again.
How many have we done so far? Is that
that's 4 now, I think. 4
for
I
him?
don't mind. I'll keep going until until you guys decide to call it.
Yeah, should we have
I'm a bit tired.
should we have another 5 more minutes of questions? Is that right, Arul?
Yeah.
Or is that too much? Okay, for another 5 minutes then. Okay,
that's fine.
I'm a bit tired.
Yeah, we'll try and keep the answers a bit shorter then.
I wish this was still going. I have so much to say.
I'm sure, Mohammed, sorry, apologies, Aaron. While you're on that point, you have so much to say. We certainly welcome you again. We can do all sorts of other topics. Absolutely. So all the stuff that you want to say, Trinity, all sorts of things. But as long as we clearly define what the title is.
No, of course.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, this one's for Mohammed. The God of Abraham does not allow lying, while the God of Muhammad allows lying under 3 circumstances. So therefore, are they the same God?
Excellent. Okay, great question. Okay, so as we see in the life of Abraham, Abraham actually lied about his wife being his sister. Did God condemn him to that? No, of course not. Okay, so this idea, and it falls into that category of saving a life, or saving someone from a dire situation. So yes, it is the same God. That's exactly what happened. We see this example with Abraham in the Old Testament, that he lied in order to protect his wife, and we see that within the conditions of the 3 lies that Allah has allowed us. So it's that simple.
Okay. A question. Do you know what? I'll open this question up to both of you, actually, because it'd be interesting to see how you both answer this one. So, as Mohammed's just gone first, I'll let Arul go, and then Mohammed can go.
That's fine.
Yeah, this one's from Simmons. If the God of Abraham is the God of Muhammad, how come Muhammad didn't stress on the 10 commandments instead of the 5 pillars, which the Jews never knew?
I'm very much looking forward to all sorts of topics in the future to debate on. Ignore the 10 commandments. God of Moses says worship has to be centered in Jerusalem. Anywhere else, you would be killed. What was the issue Jeroboam got into? He ended up with a withered hand because he built altars in northern Israel. Anywhere outside of Jerusalem, do stuff in terms of building a temple, you're gone. Now, and so Muhammad, what he has done is really come up with a fake. He's really come up with a duplicate. He can say, well, the duplicate looks like the original all the time he wants to, if he wants to. But the fact is, the very fact that you have duplicated, i.e. reproduced in some other place, means that you have a duplicate, i.e. a fake one. And so, why didn't he teach about the 10 commandments? Why didn't he actually go to Jerusalem to worship? How dare he change that? He has gone against God of the Bible time and time again. In contrast, why do Christians not care about the commandments and so on? Commandments and so on. We do care in terms of saying they testify of the nature of God. But the point is, with the Christian text, the Messiah has to. This is what Jesus said. There is going to come a time when you will worship me anywhere, everywhere, in spirit and in truth. That was a new covenant given. Muhammad asked me multiple times, why am I not circumcised? He thinks that's the only covenant available. That's a bit surprising. Abraham was given 2 covenants. Circumcision was only after Ishmael was born. Prior to that was the original covenant, which is what I'm talking about. And that covenant, nothing to do with circumcision. You can read about that early on in Genesis, well before the circumcision covenant. In Jesus, the commandments were fulfilled. We follow him. If Muhammad were to reject the sacrifice and the completion of the Torah in Jesus, then he is really in a big mess.
All right. Okay. So the 10 Commandments. If we look at the 10 Commandments, all of them bar one is preached in the Quran, as well as the 13 principles of Maimonides, except with the exception that the Torah is preserved and is the greatest, and that Moses as well as the greatest. There are a lot of similarities between the 13 principles and the 10 Commandments that are incorporated into Islam, okay, because it came from the same source. However, these differences either come from a misunderstanding of, like Muslims believe that the idea of Moses being the greatest of all the prophets is, a certain bias by the Jews, okay? However, we do not deny that he is one of the 5 great prophets. The 5 greatest prophets are specifically mentioned in the Quran. In terms of the Sabbath, as I explained, the Sabbath was done away with, and the holy day is Friday now. But this is due to progressive revelation. But everything else, obviously with the Torah we believe is corrupted, and there we have evidence for that. We have empirical evidence for that. But that's again a topic for another time. So yeah, these differences are only there for those reasons, but everything else is the same. We're not allowed to steal. We're not allowed to worship idols. We're not allowed to commit adultery. None of that. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay, we'll have 2 more questions, and I'll allow both of you can answer on this as well, so we close it like this as well. So last 2 questions. This one was actually directed to Arul, but I'll open it up to both of you. It comes from Minato. I'll ask Solomon again. It says, Arul, so Jesus was killing himself to make himself forgive the humanity. So he was basically saying to himself that Jesus took his own life. What did Jesus take his own life to forgive it, to ensure forgiveness for humanity? I think that's what he's saying.
Just I'll be right back. I just need to.
Sure, no problem.
I can wait until you. Are you going to?
Sorry, Mohammed. Do you want us to wait, or do you want Arul to carry on?
He can answer the question.
Are you leaving the desk now, or Mohammed?
No, I just need to go to relieve myself quickly.
That's fine. No, we can wait.
Okay.
We'll just wait.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Just the people in the chat, please, like, subscribe, share around, because these are the kinds of platforms that we want to have, especially with these interfaith discussions, and because podcast and my moderator a bit to one side, I am a Christian and I want the gospel to spread and be propagated, but we also, us as Christians, we invite the criticisms. We want people to come and criticize and come to question us, because we are 100% affirming Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one shall come to the Father but by him as well. There is only one way through Jesus. So this is what we want, and this is what Operation Stephen's all about, to invite people to come in and to question as well. So anything on that, Arul?
No, I agree.
Okay.
100%, 200%, 300%, 1000%. Live and breathe.
It doesn't matter what your worldview. Bring it on. Come on.
Absolutely.
Come on. Yeah, it's fine.
As long as it's asked in a way which is congenial, of course we are willing to answer. And hopefully through God's grace, several such debates and so on in the future, so we can really sort of have expert comments from both sides, and then you can see what the truth is. You can make up your mind. God has given you a facility to think through and come to a conclusion.
Yeah, we're talking about souls here. This is the eternity. This life is a vapor. Will pass on by, pass us all by one day. None of us know we're going to be here tomorrow. So, it's there's no joke. These are the biggest questions of life, and this is why we have these debates. And this is why people go down, like Brother Arul, go to Speaker's Corner to open these up to people and to propagate the gospel. And glory to Jesus Christ. Okay. Mohammed, you with us?
I'm back. Yes.
Good.
You need to remind me the question now, Aaron.
Okay, right. So the question was, where's the gentleman? Sorry, the chat's moved. It was whether one person was asking for a clarification as to whether Jesus killed himself in order to provide forgiveness for humanity. So did he kill himself?
Well, in one manner, it is Yahweh who sacrificed his own self. It is Yahweh, and Jesus holistically is Yahweh. Each person is Yahweh, but together they are the same one Yahweh. And to get to know more details about this, you need to really know the infinite nature of God. A simple guesswork like what happens in Islam would not help you arrive at appropriate conclusions. So did Yahweh sacrifice himself? Yes. But did Jesus kill himself? Well, Jesus said, I lay down my life and I take it back. This authority I have received. I lay down my life and I take it back. On the cross, you find Jesus after saying 6 specific things. The 7th one he says is, I commend my spirit. The 7th one is it is complete. I think one of the things he says is, I commend my spirit to the Father. So the fact of the matter is, Jesus did that. Could people kill Jesus if he never intended to be killed? No, no one can. He is God. But he came with the singular purpose of becoming a sacrifice after taking up human form, not some sort of a magic man with a magic wand. He had to take up regular human form like you and me, which he did, and then allowed himself to be sacrificed for your sake and for my sake. Phenomenal love. Free salvation, but not cheap. Extremely costly. It took the life of eternal Yahweh. And so Muslims, please come to Jesus Christ. Please read the Bible. That's my first request. And you would find the God of the Bible is not the Islamic Allah who Muhammad thinks he spoke to, who no one else has verified. And even Muhammad was a bit confused at times. And so please come to Jesus Christ. Please read the Bible.
Okay, so the question, did Jesus kill himself? Well, Arul's already answered that he did willingly lay down his own life. If you want to pull it crudely, then yeah, you would call that a suicide, because, if you take your own life, that is suicide. But again, the essence of God is that he is immortal. That is the essence, that he is immortal. As much as we dislike Paul, he himself says in 1 Timothy 6:16 that he alone is immortal. He's referring to God. So this idea of God dying is in direct contradiction to his essence. Like you keep mentioning that God came down, but I gave you verses. I gave you exegesis. You tell Muslims, we hear that Muslims have to read the Bible. Well, we don't just read the Bible. We read the Bible and more. We read the exegesis in order to study it. We don't hear from 12 different Christians who give us 6 different answers on the same verse. Me and you, we've both been to Speaker's Corner, and we've both heard answers from multiple people, whether it's Muslims or Christians. Okay, like my personal experience is I've had several explanations been given, but not once is exegesis cited. Not even once is commentary from Bible Hub even cited to that effect, to what is being propagated. But again, this goes back to the essence, what God does, who he is, what he is. God is immortal, so he cannot die. Okay, it's as clear as, it's as simple as that. Okay. You know, does he show up? Well, clearly not, because as I mentioned, and this is something that Arul never addressed. 1 Kings 8, chapter 8, verse 27. It simply says, I'll read it. But will God really dwell on earth? Will he really come on earth? And the heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. And this is explicit. God does not enter his creation. You know, he doesn't come down. He's not seen. I've provided exegesis on what is meant by God appearing in Genesis 18 and the poetic literary form that the Jews have used. So even if we are to concede that Jesus took his own life, can we say that God did it? No, because it wasn't God. And the sacrifice is for nothing if it's not God on the cross, for which the Old Testament is very explicit about.
Thank you. And final question of this evening. It comes from Sharon Bahati. Apologies if I've just completely mispronounced that name. It says it's for it's for both of you. Is there archaeological evidence for Abraham being in Saudi Arabia?
None. Absolutely none. We have plenty of information as to where Abraham was, but nothing tells us he was in Saudi Arabia. Just give me 1 second, please.
Your second's up.
Thank you, Mohammed. So you can do your research. You can do, the Bible gives plenty of information as to where Abraham went. The lowest, the most extreme extent to the southeast that Abraham ever went to is here. Never even properly to the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, not even to the northern part of it. So based on this information, Muslims claim that Abraham went to Mecca. Well, actually, I have some very specific details, but I have specific detail to say Abraham could not have gone from where he was, which was in Beersheba, Negev, to go to Mecca in 3 days trip. Could not have happened, technically, could not have, unless he was using a Ferrari, perhaps. So was Abraham in Arabia, Saudi Arabia? Never. Is there any evidence to suggest that he was there? None. Every evidence of every shred of information that we have about Abraham, the verifiable ones, historical ones, the ones which are qualified to talk about Abraham, all of them give information, plenty of them, and all of them place Abraham here, nowhere near Saudi Arabian Peninsula. Very important. So Islam is again lying in that regard also.
All right, well, I've already addressed this briefly in this forum when I quoted Exodus 5:1, and I've proven that Hajj in Hebrew actually refers to pilgrimage to Mecca, and this is provided in the lexicon, the Hebrew and Chaldean lexicon on page 260. So go check that out. The well, that was for Ishmael, that was provided by God. The only place we see that is in Mecca, and it's still there today, for where we draw the Zamzam water. Okay, the evidence that the pre-Islamic Arabs of Arabia, having painted on the pillars of the Kaaba, for which I cited by the historian Al-Azraqi, that they believed that it was Ibrahim alayhi salam that was there in Mecca. So these historical aspects point to this belief, that the pre-Islamic pagans of Arabia believed that their forefather, the father of their father, Ishmael and Abraham, were indeed in Mecca. And they were the ones that built the Kaaba in the first place, after Adam. So Adam laid the foundation, and Ibrahim built what we know today as the Kaaba. And obviously it's gone through its construction and stuff. But there is historical evidence for it. And it's another subject we can definitely go into.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to that debate. Absolutely.
Great. It sounds like laying out some foundations for some further talks coming up, and this is just superb. This is really good content. So there's no further questions now. I'll be taking from the YouTube live chat as well. So, but I'd like to thank both of you very much for spending all this time sitting down and humbly sitting there and expressing your viewpoints across the camera for other people to see. So it's I think if we can all just sit there and just think, okay, forget about my predispositions here. Let's just sit there and think, okay, let's be for truth and against error. I think as human beings, let's just try and focus and hammer in on what the truth is. What is the truth? What do I believe is the truth? How do I know what the truth is? And then approach topics with that aspect going forward. And I think we can learn a lot from each other. And we're, all of us, we're a big believer that truth will win out in the end. So, but listen, thank you to our guest today, Mohammed Abd Al-Razack. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And yeah, sorry, just what do you call it? I do address a lot of misconceptions about Islam. I do, speak about why we disagree with Christianity on a multitude of topics, which I will be covering, so on and so forth, on my channel, as well as on my Twitter. You can, my name here, that's what my channel is called. So check that out on YouTube. You can contact me on Twitter at MARazak26. Same for Instagram, and I also have an email for anyone who wants to ask me about any questions relating to Islam, Christianity, Judaism, as complicated as it gets.
Yes, and maybe it's good to explicitly state this. Of course, Mohammed did want the live stream to happen on his channel also, but that was sort of a last-minute request, so we couldn't do it this time. So maybe in the future.
I wanted it on both channels at the same time, but it was all last minute.
Maybe in the future, yeah. Plan in advance, try it out, see it works, because I've never done that in Zoom before. But absolute pleasure speaking to you, Mohammed. I think I've interacted with you maybe 3 or 4 times. Every time it has been a pleasure at the end, as much as it had been a pleasure at the start. So I really thank you for that. And of course, Aaron also, and the audience also, thank you for your patience. Aaron, thank you for maintaining the decorum of what we're doing. But I think it's much easier with maybe 2 people like me and Mohammed there. Hopefully I didn't misbehave, but thank you.
Everyone was good. It was really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No strikes were given out.
Yes, that's a good news.
Yeah.
Thank you. And hopefully sometime in the future, Mohammed, sooner rather than later, God strengthening.
I'm sure we'll bump into each other at Speaker's Corner at some point anyway. So
cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Christ blessings to you all. Goodbye now. Bye.